Chapter 172. The Emperor was like a dragon that had just woken up. As long as he opened his eyes, there would be an invisible pressure weighing down on everyone's hearts. This was the power of the Emperor. This was the temperament cultivated by sitting in that position for many years, where one word could decide the life and death of a person. However, as the saying goes, there are exceptions to everything. Naturally, there would be people who were not affected by the power of the Emperor. Coincidentally, there were two of them here. The Sword Saint was not afraid of the Emperor because he had the power to transcend mortality. And Bane was not afraid of the Emperor because he was often accompanied by a real dragon. Bane glanced at the Sword Saint and thought to himself, what kind of sword could make the Sword Saint coveted? No, it should be said that if there was such a powerful sword in the world, why hadn't it fallen into the hands of the Sword Saint? I was originally wondering why you didn't find a new sword after your natal sword, Flowing Light, was broken for such a long time. So you were after that sword. The Emperor glared at the Sword Saint angrily. His eyes seemed to spit fire. Bane was a little confused. He thought to himself, Sword Saint only wanted that sword. He didn't do anything. Why are you so angry? I heard that your son was rebelling against you, but I didn't see you so angry. Is there a need to be like this? That sword, I deserve it. The Sword Saint looked at the Golden King and said righteously. Golden King's face suddenly became a little ugly, but he didn't refute immediately. Ouyang Ju frowned and glanced at Zhuge Zhang, hoping that he could explain. Back then, the three of them were always together. Oh, there was also the Sword Saint's sister, Gai Minjing. The Prime Minister rubbed his aching temples and said, there was indeed such a thing. Back then, His Majesty and the Sword Saint worked together and set a trap at Yushi Path to kill the strongest competitor for the throne, the 7th Prince's Li Ji. That night, His Majesty and Sword Saint were very happy. They drank and celebrated together. His Majesty drank 2 more cups at that time. He then said to Sword Saint, Brother Mingyue is truly a hero and has helped me a lot. Although I am a prince, I am unable to thank you enough. Fortunately, although Brother Mingyue does not care about anything, he is only obsessed with the sword. If I can ascend to the throne one day, I will definitely thank you with the national sword. The Emperor glared at the Prime Minister, his face completely dark. In order to ascend to the throne, you actually gave away your family heirloom? Ouyang Ju said, you see, even Brother Zhuge remembers. He was also there that day. What else do you have to say? Sword Saint extended his hand toward the Emperor and said, give it to me. Impossible. The Emperor glared at him. His words were resolute and decisive, leaving no room for negotiation. You are the Emperor of the Middle Empire. Are you trying to go back on your words? Sword Saint said, those were drunken words. They don't count. The Emperor bit the bullet and was a little shameless. Are you really that shameless? Sword Saint asked. Compared to that sword, my face is nothing. Bane was dumbfounded. Even Prime Minister and Mr. Ouyang were watching with interest. It was rare to see the Emperor of a country acting so shamelessly. The Emperor felt a little awkward being stared at. In front of the Sword Saint, he did not care about any manners or etiquette. It was the style of an emperor. However, in front of others, he naturally could not put down his airs. Thus, the Emperor coughed lightly and said to Sword Saint, at that time, I was young and ignorant. I did not know the depth of the situation and did not think about the sword. Now that I know, I naturally cannot give it to you. You should change it. Change it? Sword Saint sneered. That's fine. Do you still remember what you said to me when you asked to marry Mingying? The Emperor was silent again. Ouyang Ju looked at Prime Minister again. Zhuge Zhang became famous at a young age. He was once known as a child prodigy. His most famous trait was his photographic memory. His memory was very good. Your Majesty once said that if you marry Mingying, you will treat her as the apple of your eye and cherish her for life. If she gives birth to a prince, he will be the crown prince. Prime Minister said. At the end of his sentence, he seemed to be unable to continue. Bane and Ouyang Ju looked at the Golden King with burning eyes. Bane was thinking, in this day and age, would there still be people who believed in this kind of lifetime vow? Aisha once told him that a man's vow of more than 7 days could not be trusted. As for a woman, It was 3 days. As for things like everlasting, the seas run dry and the rocks decay, and lifetime, they could all be considered as lies, very real lies. The only thing left was to tell you that I'm lying to you. Your Majesty really does love the beauty and not the country. Ouyang-ju looked at the emperor, resisting the urge to vomit blood as he said faintly. He thought to himself that the entire court wanted to know why the emperor did not appoint a crown prince. But after so many years, there is still no clue. It was no wonder. After all, who would have thought that the emperor would give away the position of the foundation of the empire before he ascended the throne? Back then, I was young and frivolous. Golden King said with some embarrassment. Bane carefully curled his lips. He thought to himself, I don't know if you were young or not, but you were really crazy. You can't be going back on your words. Sword Saint's tone seemed to have become sharper. Everyone present could clearly feel it. He even inadvertently stood in front of the emperor and put his hand behind his back. That was where he put his weapon. What else can I do? The emperor seemed to be very angry. To be the crown prince of the empire, one needs to be nurtured from a young age. Civil and military skills, the people's livelihood. None of these can be missing. But what about him? He went to a brothel at a young age and stayed there for more than 10 years. He became the laughingstock of the world. How can I let him be the crown prince? I don't care. Back then, when I helped you force the previous emperor to abdicate, you and I had an agreement. Sword Saint said, You're is the only bloodline of the Guy family, and also Ming Ying's flesh and blood. This is what he deserves. You just said that you want me to appoint a crown prince. Are you referring to my third son? The emperor said, Nonsense. Sword Saint was getting more and more impatient. Hurry up and let you be the crown prince, then give me the sword. I promise that the capital will be peaceful. As for your other sons, I promise that they will be safe. You want to suppress the capital with one sword? How can my other sons be safe? Golden King said, and I already said, you don't have to think about the sword. Even when the Red Disaster came, that sword was never taken out. Sword Saint didn't say anything. He rarely spoke so much with others, but because of the past, he said a few more words to the Golden King. He was now quietly looking at the Golden King. He didn't reveal his aura, but the atmosphere was getting more and more oppressive. It was as if it was suffocating. Just as Ingy put his hand on his black dagger, the 8th prince carried a person who was tied up like a dumpling and hurriedly walked over. Sword Saint glanced at him and snorted. Along with this cold snort, the originally oppressive atmosphere, as deep as the sea, was suddenly swept away. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. The 8th prince put the person on the ground and took out a black envelope from his chest. Ingyi's gaze froze. This was the Shadow Guard's special letter. And from the hidden patterns on the envelope, this letter's level wasn't low. The emperor didn't even look at the tied-up 11th prince. He only made a hand gesture, indicating for the guards standing in the distance to quickly take this embarrassing thing away and find a palace to lock him up, so as to avoid making a fool of himself. After the emperor casually dealt with the 11th prince, he took the letter, opened the seal, and took out the letter to read. With just a glance, Golden King's hand couldn't help but tremble. The black letter in his hand floated to the ground in front of everyone's eyes. Prime Minister frowned at the emperor, thinking, what kind of major event could make the emperor react like this? Prime Minister walked to the emperor, somewhat puzzled. He bent down to pick up the letter and glanced at it. Prime Minister also looked as if he was struck by lightning. His body stiffened, and the letter that was only a few inches away from the ground fell back to the ground. Prime Minister not only had the ability to remember everything he saw, but also had the ability to read 10 lines at a glance. So he only needed a moment to read the 2 lines of words on the letter. Xueqing was exposed, and the 3rd prince was furious. Li Qi Umbrella Shop gathered people to rebel. The disciples of Sword Mountain and the major gangs in the capital gathered together. It's August. Thank you for your recommendations, favorites, subscriptions, and thanks. Chapter 173. The Prime Minister paused slightly, glanced at Sword Saint from the corner of his eyes, then pretended as if nothing had happened and picked up the paper again. He casually handed it to the emperor. The emperor glanced at him and raised his hand. He glanced at Sword Saint again and finally shook his head. It was right under their noses. There was no way to hide it. What's wrong? Sword Saint noticed that the two of them kept looking at him and felt a little strange. This is a secret document of the Empire. How can I tell you? The Prime Minister said. Sword Saint immediately frowned. He felt that this matter was more and more unusual. Even if his relationship with the Golden King was tit for tat a few years ago, this empire was no secret to him. But now that they had just temporarily solved the huge problem of the Red Disaster, why was there something that couldn't be told to him? Azan, the Emperor patted the Prime Minister's shoulder twice. Your Majesty, the Prime Minister looked back at the Emperor. Give it to him, since we can't hide it from him. Why should we be so stingy? The Emperor said. Your Majesty, the Prime Minister shouted. Give it to him, the Emperor said again. The Prime Minister gritted his teeth and handed the letter to Ing, although Ing was a little confused as to why the Prime Minister didn't directly hand the letter to Sword Saint. He still took it and inadvertently glanced at the letter. Ing Yi's eyes suddenly widened. He suddenly raised his head and looked at the Emperor in shock. He now knew why the Prime Minister handed it to him. First, the Emperor nodded to Ing Yi. Ing Yi's eyebrows suddenly furrowed, as if he had encountered a huge problem. He pondered for a moment, then finally handed the letter to Sword Saint, then turned around and walked a step in front of the Golden King. Without hesitation, he pulled out a completely black dagger without a trace of light and pointed it at Sword Saint. The Prime Minister breathed a sigh of relief. Sword Saint glanced at the letter, and his eyes lit up. He read it over and over again in a short period of time. The more he read, the happier he became. In the end, he couldn't help but read it out loud. Xueqing was exposed, and the third prince was furious. The Li Qi umbrella shop had gathered people to rebel. The disciples of Sword Mountain and the major sects in the capital have all gathered here. Bane narrowed his eyes as he listened to Sword Saint's words. He understood the latter part of the sentence and could understand it. After all, the fact that the princes of the Middle Empire were fond of revolting was a hot topic in the entire continent. Not to mention the third prince, who had run away from home when he was young and had lived in a brothel for more than 10 years. He was extremely rebellious. If he didn't rebel, he would be letting down his status as a member of the Leaf family. Therefore, Bane wasn't surprised at all that the third prince wanted to rebel. As for the latter part of the sentence, he could understand it. After all, the third prince had been hanging out with those people in the underworld all these years. It was normal for him to have a few friends. But the problem was the first sentence. What did he mean by Xueqing was exposed? Sword Saint held the secret letter of the third prince's rebellion and couldn't help but say, Good, good. It was as if he had been looking forward to the third prince's rebellion for many years. May I ask your Majesty, the Golden King, what do you mean by Xueqing was exposed? Bane saw that Sword Saint was only happy for the third prince's rebellion and didn't think about anything else. The Sword Saint was also taken aback by his question. He thought to himself, that's right. All these years, how many times had he urged you? You had always been unmoved. Why did she suddenly rebel? The Golden King looked deeply at Bane and said in a low voice, It has nothing to do with you. Who is Xueqing? Sword Saint asked. You don't know, Bane said in surprise. Sword Saint shook his head. Bane thought for a moment and felt that it should be because of Zhao Qi. He might have told Sword Saint everything about the third prince, but it wasn't good to tell his master about such matters. Therefore, Bane told Sword Saint everything about Xueqing. I see. Sword Saint nodded and said, So, that palace maid is one of your people? The last sentence was naturally for the Golden King. Everyone in the Middle Empire is one of my people, Golden King said. You know, that's not what I meant. Sword Saint looked at the Emperor and pulled out the steel sword that Bane used for sword practice from his waist. The sword was used for practice. The material wasn't good. In order to protect the beginner, the blade wasn't even sharpened. However, when it was held in Sword Saint's hand, no one in the world dared to look down on it. Every prince has more than one person like this. Golden King said, I have a lot of work to do every day. I can't split myself, so I need someone that both I and the prince believe in, to help me understand the prince's every move. In other words, You've planted a watcher beside every prince who grew up with them since they were young, to help you monitor all the princes. There's no need to make it sound so bad. Are you still human? This isn't my original creation. This is a tradition of the Middle Empire. Tradition. Do you still remember Sujin? The palace maid who was always by your side and never left your side? She was placed by my side by the late emperor. Huh. What other traditions do your family have that I don't know? There's no need for outsiders to know. You royal family are a bunch of lunatics. If you want to wear the crown, you have to bear its weight. This is the price you have to pay. Then why is you the only one like this? Is it your idea? Of course not. Then why did you fall in love with a palace maid? He even escaped from the palace for her. I told him to go to Sword Mountain, but he didn't go. I was wondering what the reason was, but it turned out to be to guard her. Now, for her, he didn't hesitate to rebel. This wasn't what I wanted. Maybe Ewer lost his mother when he was young, and there was a woman around his age who he could trust, so it was inevitable that he fell in love with her. Prepare to die. Before the Golden King could finish his words, the Sword Saint had already angrily stabbed his sword towards the Golden King. The sword's aura surged, and the sword's wind howled, toppling the mountains and overturning the seas. The Golden King suddenly mentioned his poor little sister. How could he not be furious? Sword Saint Sama, please reconsider. He shouted and stood in front of the Sword Saint. It's none of your business. Get out of the way. The Sword Saint said and slightly turned the tip of his sword, and the blade fell on Yi's dagger. From the looks of it, the Sword Saint wanted to push Yi away. Bane's eyes lit up. He had seen the Sword Saint's move before. It was the move he practiced 2 days ago, Wild Horse's mane parting. The Sword Saint said that this move could push away the enemy's weapon or hands, and then directly attack the enemy. But now, the Sword Saint wanted to use this move to push away a person. Moreover, this person was a legend rank expert. Bane said in his heart. The Sword Saint was indeed the Sword Saint. The same move used by different people could be so different. However, although the Sword Saint was strong, he was not weak either. As a legend rank expert, there was no reason for him to be pushed away by the Sword Saint, a move that even Bane could use. The moment Yi touched the Sword Saint's sword, he had already activated his movement skill, turning into a black wind and circling around the Sword Saint. Everyone could only see a faint black afterimage, flickering around the Sword Saint's body from time to time. Every time the afterimage flashed, it meant that Yi had made a move against the Sword Saint. The Sword Saint waved the steel sword in his hand. Although his speed was not fast, he was able to perfectly block Yi's dagger every time. Ding ding dang dang. The sound of sword and dagger colliding was as dense as raindrops falling to the ground. No one knew how many times Yi had attacked in this short period of time, nor did they know how the Sword Saint's seemingly slow sword was able to block Yi's countless daggers that were like raindrops, as if there were thousands of them. Mr. Ouyang sighed. Although he didn't know what the problem was, he clearly knew that Shadow he had already lost. Please recommend, please add. Thank you for your support. Thank you. Chapter 174. Guy Mingwe, you really live up to your reputation as the best swordsman in the Middle Empire for thousands of years. You deserve the name of Sword Saint. Ouyang Ju nodded slightly. He has been defeated. Sword Saint is unparalleled in history. This is a matter of course, Bane said. But why did you say that Yi has been defeated? Bane looked at the battlefield where Sword Chi was everywhere. In just a short while, the originally quiet and beautiful Imperial Garden was in a mess because of the aftermath of the battle between the two legendary masters. It was too horrible to look at. Looking at the situation again, although Bane couldn't see clearly, he could also tell that Yi had the upper hand and was carrying out a crazy attack without any gap. And Sword Saint was just blindly defending and hadn't counterattacked yet. It seemed that Yi had the upper hand and had the upper hand. How could it be said that he was defeated? Because Sword Saint is a swordsman, a warrior, and Yi is an assassin, Mr. Ouyang said, leaving the West Gate in the morning, returning with a head in the evening. This is the kind of people like Sword Sage Darren. But people like Yi, the wind is bleak and the water is cold. A warrior who leaves and never returns is the true portrayal of them. For people like Yi, what they pursue is to kill with one blow. They either don't make a move, or they kill their opponents with one blow. When Yi didn't succeed in his first attack, he was at a disadvantage. Now, he is about to be defeated. Look! Bane heard this and hurriedly looked over. Sure enough, he saw Sword Saint calmly stabbing out his sword under the intensive attacks of Yi. This sword seemed to have pierced through the dark sky and the dark earth, piercing through the dark clouds in the midst of a violent storm. The dark clouds dissipated, the wind and rain stopped, and the blue sky quietly appeared. The black whirlwind and the afterimages all dissipated. Instead, he was standing in front of the Golden King, but his figure was a little bent, and there was a trace of blood dripping down from the corner of his mouth. Yi looked at the Sword Saint and spat out a mouthful of blood. But he didn't dare to make any extra movements because there seemed to be a sharp wind raging inside his body. The Sword Saint calmly struck out with his sword, containing countless amounts of sword energy. "Sir Sword Saint, you are indeed powerful," Yi said. But if... Yi suddenly stopped talking halfway. He wanted to say that if he had made the first move, he would not have lost so easily. However, when he saw the steel sword in Sword Saint's hand, he swallowed his words. Because the sword in the Sword Saint's hand was a perfect steel sword without a single crack. The weapon in his hand was a divine weapon forged by the dwarf for the sake of the Central Empire. It was Yi Feng, a divine weapon forged by the dwarves with all their might. It would be an exaggeration to say that it could cut through a hair, but to say that it could cut through iron like it was mud was not an exaggeration. Logically speaking, the Yi Feng should have been able to cut through the Sword Saint's sword in half. During this time, how many times did the Yi Feng and the Sword Saint's sword collide? 500? 800? 1,000? Yi himself couldn't remember. But the Sword Saint's sword was still in perfect condition. What did this mean? He didn't want to think too much about it. Right now, he only had one thought. The Sword Saint and the Emperor of Physique were indeed the two strongest legends of humanity. Good. Bane saw the Sword Saint win so easily and couldn't help but wave his fist. Mr. Ouyang looked at him and asked curiously, "Why are you so happy? Do you want the Sword Saint to win?" "Yes." Bane nodded. "Why?" "In the end, this matter has nothing to do with you." Bane was silent for a while, then said, "I know Miss Xueqing. She's a very good woman. The third prince likes her very much. We even helped the third prince come up with a plan to pursue Miss Xueqing, although we didn't succeed in the end. However, even Jilin came up with a plan." "Oh, the Red Calamity also did this kind of thing?" "Haha. Although most of the moves were stupid, like robbing, kicking the door, smashing the wall, and saving the damsel in distress. The last one was still okay, but what about the first ones?" Jilin said that only humans would go through so much trouble when looking for a mate, being overcautious and afraid of everything. Other creatures are much simpler. It should be said that they're much more violent. If humans were like this, the world would definitely be dark and colorless. Haha, perhaps. But is it worth it? After all, Xueqing is a palace maid, and the third prince is an imperial descendant. Staya said that this kind of thing isn't worth it, and no one cares even if it is. Why do you ask when you already know the answer? How do you know that I'm asking when I already know the answer? Sir's romantic affairs when he was young are still circulating in the streets and alleys of the capital. Although I haven't been in the capital for long, I've heard a little about it. Ha ha, the absurd things of the young are not worth mentioning. Not worth mentioning, but is it not worth it? This is very reasonable, as expected of the princess of the Saimai Empire. So you think that His Majesty did something wrong? Bane shook his head. I don't understand, and I can't explain it clearly. I only think that the Golden King's actions are a bit disgusting, a bit dirty. I don't know how to describe it, but I think that Sir Sword Saint is right. This is not something a human would do. He disgusted his son. If Aisha was here, she would definitely use the most vicious words to greet him. The most evil witch on the continent is also an infatuated person. Ouyang Ju was also stunned. She's not. She never believed in these things, but that doesn't stop her from criticizing others. Bane smiled and shook his head. You are indeed worthy of the name of a witch." Mr. Ouyang also smiled and took out a book from his bosom. In the field, the Sword Saint was already walking towards the Emperor with his sword. "Sir Sword Saint, don't go any further." Yi said, "I don't want to fight with my life on the line. You should sit down, or else the sword won't be able to hold it, and it will be very troublesome." Sword Saint said, "You." Yi gritted his teeth and wanted to rush forward, but a hand reached out from behind and patted his shoulder. The Golden King nodded at him. He was silent for a moment, then walked to the side and sat down. "You're quite calm." Sword Saint pointed his sword at the Emperor, and the sword aura poured out like an ocean. The Emperor took out the Imperial Jade Seal from his sleeve and blocked in front of him. Sword Saint's sword aura seemed to have hit a wall and couldn't move an inch. "You think you can stop me just because you have the Imperial Jade Seal? You don't have the palace gate now." Sword Saint said, "You really want to kill me?" Golden King said, "I won't kill you. That's Ur's problem in the future. But today I have to cut you with my sword. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." Sword Saint said, "I wanted to cut you with my sword for a long time. You want him to kill his father?" Golden King shouted, "That's not necessary." Sword Saint said, "But I can still lock you up in the palace until you die, just like what you and I did in the past." The late Emperor didn't want to leave the palace. "I didn't lock him up." The Emperor could tolerate Sword Saint's nonsense for other things, but this was no small matter. It's all the same, no matter who it is. If one of his sons killed more than half of his other sons, he probably won't have the heart to go out for a walk for the rest of his life. If he wants to take revenge, he won't be able to do it. If he doesn't take revenge, he won't be able to do it. Sword Saint casually said these words. Back then, it was you who pointed your sword at the late Emperor, forcing him to abdicate. "Why are you pretending to be an outsider? What are you talking about?" The Emperor said. "Ha ha ha." Sword Saint looked up to the sky and laughed until tears came out of his eyes. "You're the one who hired the assassins, and when you can't live with your conscience, you blame the assassins for coming to comfort you? That's not what I meant. I'm just reminding you that you also had a part to play in what happened back then. Everyone in the world can say that I killed my brothers and forced my father to usurp the throne, but you can't." Golden King said, "Why can't Asterisk King do it?" Sword Saint was so angry that he actually cursed in a way that he hadn't said in decades. It was as if he had returned to the young man who used to bully the wind and rain with his sword. "Back then, I fought for you and helped you ascend to the throne. I even gave you my life, and that's nothing. I even married my sister, who I depended on for survival, to you. But what about you? What did you give me in return? My only sister actually died in the Imperial Palace. Tell me, did those wives of yours secretly kill Ming Ying?" Hearing Sword Saint's words, Yi completely closed his eyes to suppress his injuries. No wonder the Golden King didn't care about the danger and asked him to step aside. This wasn't something that an outsider should be involved in. Have you heard too many Asterisk King folktales? Golden King couldn't help but curse at Sword Saint. Who do you think Ming Ying is? How could those harem women hurt her? When Ming Ying married in the palace, what did you give her as a dowry? Don't you have any idea? Prime Minister listened with a pained expression. Golden King's words brought back some bad memories. When the Emperor married Guy Ming Ying, he was the one who arranged and followed the whole process. When Ming Ying's dowry box was opened, others thought that Ming Ying wanted to use the wedding as an excuse to assassinate the Emperor. Green sword, Mingguang armor, divine crossbow, magic crystal, thunderclap, phoenix dance. It's easy to dodge a spear in the open, but hard to dodge a stab in the dark. Sword Saint said, "I think you've gone crazy from practicing your sword. Who told you that the harem must be treacherous and dangerous? You said it yourself." Golden King glanced at Prime Minister. Prime Minister nodded, indicating that it was true. "Impossible," the Emperor said. "That day, Your Majesty and Sword Saint successfully plotted to kill the second prince. That night, they drank to celebrate. Your Majesty talked about the horrors of the harem in the past as a topic of conversation." Prime Minister said methodically, "Speak. Who was it?" Sword Saint asked the Emperor. "It's late today. Sorry, everyone." Chapter 175. The emperor did not expect that his most trusted comrade would stab him in the back at such a crucial moment. He also did not expect that it was because the prime minister had long complained about this matter. The prime minister always thought that if he had not been drunk and spouted nonsense, he would not have scared the sword saint to such an extent, and he would not have brought Minging a box of murder weapons as her dowry, creating so much trouble for himself. The most infuriating thing was that although the massacre was horrifying, it was not enough to scare the sword saint who was used to killing people. But the bad thing was that the emperor was also Ouyang Ju's student, and adding fuel to the fire was a skill inherited from him. Also, the prime minister even secretly thought that the reason why the sword saint had not yet gotten married was not because he was obsessed with swordsmanship, but because he was simply frightened. It's really no one, with you around, who would dare to harm Minging. The emperor said, "Then it's you who did it," the sword saint suddenly said in a sinister tone. The emperor choked and then laughed bitterly. "I see. No wonder. So all these years you actually thought that I was the one who harmed Minging. If others are afraid of me and do not dare to harm Minging, then you are the only one in the palace." The sword saint said, "What explanation do you have?" "Huh." The emperor laughed domineeringly. "I am the emperor of the Middle Empire. This is the palace. How can I explain to you?" The sword saint raised his sword and took a step closer to the emperor. "The situation is stronger than you. You have no choice but to lower your head." "I don't think so." The emperor raised his head and said, "All right." The sword saint nodded, bowed, and stepped forward. He kept his sword behind his back. He actually took up a stance. Bane swallowed a mouthful of saliva, thinking that when he was fighting against the legendary master, the sword saint only casually swung his sword twice. But now he had set up a sword stand. How terrifying was this sword strike? After a short period of accumulation, the sword saint stabbed out with an extremely sharp sword. The steel sword turned into a silver-white light, streaking across the air, and instantly landed in front of the emperor. He was horrified, thinking that he should not have listened to the emperor just now. This sword, most likely he would not be able to block it. If something happened to the emperor, he would have to kill himself to appease the world. The sword saint's sword was too fast. It was as fast as lightning, and it disappeared in the blink of an eye. The emperor was as steady as a mountain, without a trace of fear on his face. At this critical moment, an open book appeared in front of the sword saint's sword light. The sound of countless students reciting the sage's scriptures suddenly rang out between heaven and earth. The Tao, heaven and earth. For example, Beichun, those who are benevolent must seek the benefit of the world. Meng Qi sighed. "The heavens is, sir." The emperor looked at the slightly stooped figure in front of him and shouted in a trembling voice. Ouyang Ju looked at the emperor, but did not say anything. Although he did not like this student, he was still his student. He could not just stand by and watch his student be bullied by outsiders. There was no such thing in this world. That was why he stood up at this crucial moment. That was why he led his own students' group of officials in the imperial court and supported Li Zheng unconditionally for decades. Ouyang Ju was a great writer, but he was not good at cultivation and his realm was not high. But he had the noble spirit in him. All evils should be repelled, and swords should not touch him. When the sword saint heard the sound of recitations, he knew that it was Mr. Ouyang who had made his move. He frowned, and with a flick of his wrist, the strength of the sword was reduced by 80 to 90%. He didn't want this venerable old man to die by his own sword. "Mr. Ouyang, what are you doing?" the sword saint asked. He. Ouyang Ju smiled, stroked his beard, and kept the book. "I did not expect this old man to be able to block the sword saint's sword. What a hero." The sword saint did not say anything, and just watched as Ouyang Ju boasted. As long as the old man was happy, it was fine. Otherwise, why would he hit him? Ouyang Ju saw that no one was supporting him and felt a little awkward. But for an old man like him, he had already seen through everything. Awkwardness was not worth mentioning. Ouyang Ju's face turned serious and said to the sword saint seriously, "A country cannot live without a ruler. I did not want to kill him. I only wanted to stab him." The sword saint said, "When the ruler is humiliated, the subject dies. Ouyang-ju said, meaning, to hurt the emperor, he had to be killed first. Mr. Ouyang, are you sure that I do not dare to kill you? The sword saint said. Umph. Ouyang-ju did not say anything, and only snorted coldly. His meaning was clear: if you dare, then try. The sword saint clenched the sword in his hand, paused for a moment, and then bowed to the Ouyang-ju. He really did not dare. Since he did not dare, then the sword in his hand was useless. The sword saint almost instinctively drew a flower with the sword and handed it behind him. Bane saw this and quickly got up, ran behind the sword saint, and took the steel sword with both hands. Give me that sword, and I will leave, the sword saint said to the emperor as he reached out his hand. I already said it is impossible. The emperor said, besides, where are you going? Are you going to find the third prince? Are you going to bring your disciples to help him rebel and force me to abdicate? Why not? The sword saint said, this is what I should do. If the third prince ascended to the throne with your help, then he might not be able to keep his position. The emperor said, this position is not as easy as you think. I am here. The sword saint said, besides, didn't you ascend to the throne because of me? However, you are no longer the same as before. You cannot be mentioned in the same breath. The emperor said, with your current status, if you really help the other princes will not have a chance. No matter what, I will keep him safe for the rest of his life. Then you should make him give up on the rebellion. Based on what? Based on the fact that the Middle Empire is not Nan Xin. It's not enough to just rely on strength. Anyway, I will take care of this matter, and you will replace you. I will ask you now, the sword, are you going to give it to me or not? I cannot give it to you. Fine, don't regret it in the future, the sword saint said coldly, then turned around and left. The Golden King also waved his sleeve and handed the imperial jade seal to the prime minister. For someone like the sword saint, since he didn't succeed in one strike and put down the sword, he naturally wouldn't attack again. Besides, the imperial jade seal was also quite heavy for him to carry around. Lord Sword Saint, I will go with you. I haven't seen the third prince in a while. I wonder how he is doing. I miss him. Bane hurriedly said. The sword saint nodded and said, of course. Please wait for a moment. Bane said. The sword saint raised his eyebrows, feeling a bit strange, but he still stopped. He didn't even turn around. Bane ran in front of the Ouyang-ju, knelt down, and said, thank you for your teachings, sir. I will definitely remember it. The Ouyang-ju smiled, nodded, and said very well. Bane didn't get up, but turned around and kowtowed to the Golden King again. The Golden King and the Sword Saint both frowned. The Sword Saint was a bit angry, while the Golden King was a bit confused. Ever since Bane was imprisoned in the royal palace, he had never been so polite to the king of a foreign country. Your Majesty, Golden King, thank you for taking care of me these past few days, Bane said with a smile. The young man's warm smile was always full of sunshine. Actually, I used to be friends with the third prince. Bane's smile became more and more silly, like an ordinary boy next door who went to his friend's house to play and was greeting his friend's parents. The Golden King didn't say anything, but in his mind, I don't need you to tell me that. The third prince once told me about you, and now it seems that the third prince was right. Bane kept smiling. The third prince once told me that his father was. Bane's topic successfully piqued everyone's curiosity. Except for the Sword Saint, everyone was looking at him. They wanted to know what the third prince, who ran away from home when he was young, said about his father, the Golden King, in private. Although everyone could guess most of it, they still wanted to hear Bane personally tell them. The Golden King couldn't help but lean forward slightly. Bane grinned at him and said, "Animal." Without warning, he flipped his sword and stabbed upwards with both hands. "How dare you? How dare you?" Cries of surprise echoed throughout the royal garden. As expected of the sword skill taught by the Sword Saint, it was extremely beautiful. A standard move, Flood Dragon rises from the sea. Bane had fused with his habits as a thief, and this strike of his was extremely crafty and hidden. The only flaw was that it lacked a trace of spirituality. No one expected that a Tier 3 thief would dare to attack someone in the Middle Empire's royal palace. openly assassinating the Emperor of the Middle Empire. Thank you for your subscriptions and recommendations. Please continue to support me. I am very grateful. Chapter 176. There were countless people in this world who had made up their minds to change themselves. But in the end, most of them only used their actions to prove what it meant to change mountains and rivers, but not a person's nature. Bane was the same. He had been in the Middle Empire for nearly 2 months. During this time, he had learned the magnificent way of the sword from the Sword Saint, and learned the profound words of the past saints from the literary hero of a generation, Mr. Ouyang. Logically speaking, a person should have become more neutral and peaceful, but Bane just couldn't change some of his habits as a thief. The Sword Saint taught him the upright and stable way of the sword. He had to use it in a crafty and strange way, and it was extremely dangerous. Mr. Ouyang told him the story of chiseling the wall to steal light and lying on ice to find carp. He had to say that the person could not melt the ice at all and could only freeze to death on the ice. Even a legendary powerhouse could not melt the completely frozen surface of the river with just their body temperature, unless that person was Jilin. As for the person who chiseled the wall of his neighbor's house for his own studies, he was not a good person. Wasn't this the standard of harming others to benefit oneself? This kind of person could only be said to have studied in vain. Bane's rotten wood could not be carved, which made the Sword Saint and Mr. Ouyang shake their heads repeatedly. They could only say in their hearts, the human that the Red Calamity likes is indeed extraordinary. In the end, Bane was just a small character, an ordinary person. He used to live a difficult life and had limited means to maintain his life. The craftsmanship of a thief was the foundation of his life. For a small character like Bane, he did not have much ambition. He did not covet anything more. He only hoped to hold on tightly to what he had already obtained and not lose it. Therefore, Bane was not willing to change. Some people were already doing their best just to live. How could they care about looking good or not? When Bane stabbed with his sword, the sunny smile on his face did not change at all. This was what Aisha had taught him. He had to work hard to deceive people. After all, no one was stupid. Bane's stab was extremely sudden, insidious, and tricky. It was like a cat basking comfortably in the sun suddenly bared its fangs and claws and attacked the pedestrians on the road. In addition, no one was on guard against him. Even Sword Saint did not expect him to assassinate the Emperor of the Middle Empire. As a result, everyone was suddenly caught off guard. "Stop!" Mr. Ouyang shouted anxiously. In his haste, he actually used his hand to grab Bane's sword. Fortunately, Bane's sword was not sharpened. Otherwise, he would have sliced off half of Ouyang Ju's palm. Ouyang grabbed Bane's sword tightly, but he couldn't stop the sword from piercing forward. An unsharpened sword is still a sword, but a sword has a tip. That was probably the only part of the sword that could hurt people. The tip of the sword pierced through the bright yellow dragon robe that represented supremacy in the Middle Empire. It pierced into the man's stomach. Bane was suddenly stunned. His sunny smile froze on his face. He clearly felt that he had stabbed the Golden King. The tip of the sword had even penetrated a few inches, but for some reason, it couldn't go any further. Just as Bane was stunned, the sword in his hand was taken away by Mr. Ouyang and thrown to the ground. Before Bane could react, a black shadow flashed behind him. A black dagger was aimed at the back of his neck. The cold air of the blade brushed past Bane's neck. In the next second, his head would be separated from his body. When he saw the Emperor being stabbed by an ant in front of his eyes, he couldn't believe it. How could he calm down? He immediately went crazy and swore to kill this person regardless of his injuries. Bane felt a clear chill on the back of his neck. He instinctively knew that he didn't have long to live. There was no way he could avoid the killing blow of a legendary figure. Bane had already given up struggling. He used the last moment to look at the Emperor who was clutching his stomach with blood still flowing out. He grinned sincerely. He, an insignificant person, was able to stab the Emperor. It was worth it. Ding! The sound of metal colliding rang out behind Bane. Bane couldn't help but shrink back in fear. "You also know fear," the Sword Saint said behind Bane. The Sword Saint's hands were clenched tightly in the air. It was as if he was holding a sword in his hand. But no matter who saw it, his hands were empty. But no one would think that this was a childish joke by the Sword Saint, because he blocked Ing Yi's Yi phone. Ing Yi's dagger was blocked in an empty place. He looked at the Sword Saint in horror. What was going on? Was this still reasonable? This was the Void Sword, the fastest sword of the Sword Saint. The Sword Saint raised his hand to block Ing Yi's dagger. He turned around and carried Bane under his waist. Then he turned into a breeze and disappeared indifferently. The Sword Saint was confident that he could kill his way out of the palace when it was still intact. Now that the palace had lost its entrance and many of the magic circles were ineffective, the Sword Saint could go anywhere he wanted. He could even take someone with him. Call the Imperial Doctor. The Prime Minister supported the Emperor and shouted, "Your Majesty, Your Majesty, how are you?" The Golden King held the Prime Minister's hand and slowly sat on the ground. He waved his hand and said, "I'm fine." Fortunately, this little guy's realm is very low. The sword didn't stab too deep. It's just a flesh wound. "Your Majesty," the Prime Minister said in a trembling voice. He was so anxious that he didn't know what to say. He could only blame himself for not expecting that Bane would dare to attack the Emperor. Think about it. I haven't been injured for many years. The Emperor smiled and seemed to be in a good mood. "Your Majesty." He trembled as he walked to the Emperor. The sword energy in his body could no longer be suppressed. It was raging everywhere in his body, scarring all his muscles and veins. "Your Majesty, the Beta Sagittarii has already chased after them with the Shadow Guard. They will definitely cut the thief into pieces." He said fiercely. "Don't chase," the Golden King said. "You can't catch up with them. Even if you catch up, you can't defeat them." "How can that be?" He said. Now that the Sword Saint doesn't have a sword in his hand, he can't use the sword control technique. How can he not catch up? Moreover, the injuries left by the Sword Saint after the battle with the Red Disaster have yet to heal. If he really goes all out, even if the Beta Sagittarii can't do anything to the Sword Saint, they will definitely be able to kill that damn thief. If he really doesn't have a sword in his hand, then you would have already cut off the thief's head just now. The Golden King shook his head gently. Besides, it's not worth it to fight with him. "Your Majesty is wise," Ouyang Ju said softly. He rarely flattered the Golden King like this. "Sir, do you also think that the third prince is suitable for that position?" The Golden King had his own understanding of his teacher's words. "The third prince's age is the most suitable for all the princes," Ouyang Ju said. "Sir, you've said this many times," the Golden King said, "but you've never heard of it. How can the Empire rely on those mysterious fates to choose an heir? This is called the mandate of heaven. The mandate of heaven is unpredictable. Sir, how can you be sure that the divination you've measured is correct? It's better than a group of princes and brothers killing each other and then deciding who's left in the end. Ha! The emperors of the Middle Empire have all killed their brothers. I've killed them, my father, my grandfather, they've all been killed. When it came to my son's generation, if they suddenly stopped killing, wouldn't it seem that my ancestors were too cruel and cold-blooded? Wouldn't it be setting my ancestors up for injustice? Wouldn't that be letting my ancestors down?" Ouyang Ju glanced at the Golden King without saying anything. There was no way to respond to this at all. Since the logic had already gone so far, it could be said that it was nonsense. How is His Majesty? The Imperial doctors had already arrived. A group of people surrounded the Emperor and carefully examined his wounds. Seeing that it seemed to have come to an end, the Prime Minister couldn't help but ask, "It's just a superficial wound. His Majesty is fine," the head of the Imperial doctors hurriedly said. The Prime Minister and Ouyang Ju suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. "Go and see," the Golden King said. The head of the Imperial doctors turned his head and looked at Yi, who was still unconscious and trembling on the ground, and said firmly, "Your Majesty, there's no need." "Oh, Head Chin seems to have improved his medical skills. Just by taking a look here, you know that he is fine?" The Golden King was quite surprised. "That's not it." Head Chin saluted and said, "It's the old minister. Just by taking a look here, he knew that the old minister can't cure this injury." "What?" The Golden King's eyes widened, almost pulling the wound. This injury is internal. The sword energy injected into the human body can still multiply endlessly. Sword Saint is indeed the best swordsman in the millennium, the head of the Imperial Doctors said. His words were completely illogical and did not make any sense. But the meaning of the words was very clear. I just can't cure this injury, but your majesty doesn't have to worry too much. Sensing he hasn't died for so long, he won't die. Sword Saint has shown mercy. The emperor breathed a sigh of relief and couldn't help but glare at him. If the problem of the literati was that they liked to add oil and vinegar and exaggerate, then the problem of the doctors was that they always liked to say something halfway and scare people. Chapter 177. The Sword Saint turned into a gust of wind and carried Bane out of the palace, then out of the capital. Finally, they landed in a desolate area. As soon as they landed, the Sword Saint suddenly staggered. He clutched his chest with his right hand and coughed violently. Clearly, even with his cultivation level, it was extremely difficult for him to bring someone out of the capital with an escape technique. Moreover, he had not recovered from his injuries. Sir Sword Saint, are you all right? As a legend, even the Sword Saint could not help but stagger and cough. Of course, he was not all right. But Bane actually asked such an obvious question, which meant that he was panicking. The Sword Saint did not try to be brave and said that he was fine. He did not answer Bane's question and instead asked, how does it feel to stab the Emperor of the Middle Empire? This is the wish that the Simi Empire has been yearning for so many years, but has never been able to fulfill it. I didn't expect that you would succeed today. Bane was stunned. He thought about it seriously and smiled. Very good. He really smiled a lot today. Hee. Unfortunately, your level is too low compared to Li Zhang. That stab was too shallow. The Sword Saint looked a little regretful, but that move of yours was pretty good. It had an unexpected effect. Thank you, Sir Sword Saint, for your compliment, Bane said, looking a little shy. The Sword Saint thought to himself, how is this a person who just relied on his courage to assassinate the Emperor? But why do I feel that you don't seem to be unhappy at all? The Sword Saint said, unhappy about what? Bane was a little puzzled. I almost killed the Emperor of the Middle Empire. I didn't want to kill him at all. Bane was stunned. Then he opened his eyes wide and hurriedly explained. After all, he is the father of the third prince. Why would I want to kill him? I just wanted to stab him with my sword and vent third young master's anger. This time, it was the Sword Saint's turn to be stunned. Just to avenge, he wanted to stab the Emperor. He did not think that there was a second person in this world who had such thoughts. The Sword Saint nodded. The more he looked at Bane, the more he liked him, although he always used the sword skills that he taught him in a nondescript way. Just like that move of the sea serpent. It was such a righteous and majestic move, but in the end, this guy used it with a wretched aura. However, this was nothing compared to Bane's courage to draw his sword against the Emperor. Before you attacked, you knew that I would be able to save you of your life? Sword Saint asked. You know, if Ingi hadn't been injured more seriously than me, with his speed, I might not have been able to stop him. Bane was a little speechless. He thought to himself, Jilin came to the Middle Empire and casually beat up 2 legends until they were disabled. It had been more than a month since they last met. That was not all. The key was that these 2 people were barely alive, but they could still cause trouble here. He had to admit that they were both monsters. I didn't think so much at that time. Bane said, I only had one thought at that time, and that was that I had to stab him on behalf of the third prince. Otherwise, the third prince would be too aggrieved. Ha ha! The Sword Saint looked up to the sky and laughed. He laughed so hard that Bane was a little confused. After a while, the Sword Saint's laughter suddenly stopped. He looked at Bane and said seriously, Actually, your talent in swordsmanship is not that good. I misjudged you at that time. Bane blinked and thought, Sword Saint, what do you mean? I thought that your temperament was good and that you were a good seedling for swordsmanship, but I didn't expect that your path had already gone astray. The Sword Saint said, but it doesn't matter. A stray path is still a path. There's a saying in the Middle Empire, blazing a new trail. Have you heard of it? I've heard of it, but I don't really understand what you mean. Bane said, what I mean is that with your qualifications, it will be very difficult for you to achieve anything in swordsmanship. Vane secretly curled his lips and thought that the sword saint was really tactful. With his attainments in swordsmanship, if he said that it was difficult for anyone to practice swordsmanship, then no one would have the heart to practice swordsmanship anymore. So, you don't have to practice any swordsmanship anymore. Vane thought to himself, as expected, I will create a new sword move for you. From now on, you will only practice this one move. If you can't practice a set of swordsmanship, how can you not practice a single move? The sword saint nodded as he spoke. The more he spoke, the more he felt that what he said made sense. In any case, if he wanted to use his sword against the Red Disaster, he could only use one move at most. It would be useless even if he practiced more. Vane took a deep breath. The sword saint had created a sword move for him. How great a favor was this? Thank you, sword saint. Vane cupped his fists and said in a deep voice, There's no need for that. The sword saint helped Vane up. Of course, this is all for later. Then what do we do now? Vane asked. Find you. Then, we'll make a long-term plan. Are we really going to help the third Prince Rebel? What do you think? I think it's fine. We'll see when the time comes. All right. Lord Sword Saint, the sword you mentioned before, what kind of sword is it? Oh, that's the national weapon of the Middle Empire. Its name is Nine Cauldrons. Nine Cauldrons, the Wildlands Beast God Mountain. The Beast God Mountain was a lone mountain peak. It could be the only mountain peak in the entire Wildlands. Therefore, it was very lonely and steep. In the past, this was the holy land of the Beastmen and the residence of the Beast King. Its status was self-evident. However, although the Beast God Mountain was important, it was also very deserted. This was because the Beastmen kings did not have the bad habit of attending court every morning like the human emperors. Therefore, the Beastmen usually did not come here. However, it was different these few days. The surroundings of the Beast God Mountain suddenly became bustling with noise and excitement. There were countless orcs who had brought their tents and settled down here. They had almost completely surrounded the Beast God Mountain. It was bustling with activity. If the Golden King saw this scene, he would probably think that the Beastmen were rebelling. Now, they were forcing him to abdicate. In fact, these Beastmen were not rebelling. They were here to worship the Dragon God. Not long ago, Jilin learned how to repair the Bright Snow Divine weapon from the Dwarf King. After that, he began to focus on repairing the Bright Snow Divine weapon. His clone in this world was lying on the ground. No matter how Aisha and the Dwarf King called out to him, there was no response. Singh looked at Jilin and thought for a while. He decided to bring Jilin back to the Beast God Mountain and worship him as a statue. This way, the beastmen who were willing to worship him would be lucky enough to see the Dragon God. This would motivate the beastmen. At the same time, they could keep an eye on Jilin to ensure that nothing would go wrong. Wasn't this the best of both worlds? Sorry, everyone. Chapter 178. In the main hall of the Beast God Mountain, countless orcs wearing light yellow robes were sitting cross-legged on the ground facing Jilin, crowding the spacious hall without any gaps. Moreover, they were kowtowing to Jilin regularly, chanting some mysterious language that even they themselves did not know the meaning of. On the other hand, Jilin sat upright on the throne with his eyes closed and didn't move in the slightest. Of course, Jilin's entire attention was focused on the Qian Kuan world, trying his best to repair the Bright Snow Divine weapon. The body that was left in this world was just an empty shell. No matter what others did, he would not have any reaction. Aisha stood behind a pillar in a remote corner of the hall and looked at the scene of hundreds of orcs worshipping the heavenly dragon. She could not help but nod slightly. She felt that compared to the god sacrifice of the Church of Light, these orcs were more ritualistic. Aisha and the Dwarf King would come and take a look at Jilin's clone every day, mainly to see if he had woken up and also to see if there were any unforeseen events. If there were any, they could prepare in advance. Whether it was hiding or escaping, it was fine. Singh and those orcs who only knew how to count up did not know, but Aisha and the Dwarf King were very clear about it. The clone that Jilin left behind was not as simple as a body. This clone was condensed from an unimaginable amount of fire element. and fire element was the most violent and unstable element among all the elements. In other words, Jilin's clone could also be seen as a fire attribute forbidden spell that could explode at any time. And it was the kind with extremely strong destructive power. If Jilin's clone suddenly exploded, the Beast God Mountain in the southern wasteland would be 1/3 shorter. Aisha and the Dwarf King felt that this was a very normal thing. But now, these orcs were taking turns in front of the forbidden spell, waving their hands and legs in a meaningless manner and chanting incantations. What was the difference between this and standing on the edge of a cliff and practicing high jumping? Every time she thought of this, Aisha admired the courage and strength of the orcs. By the way, what was that iron rod you took out before? Why did the warlord not even dare to move when he was pointed at? Aisha pretended to ask casually. The Dwarven King tilted his head and looked at Aisha. He thought to himself, this which has been asking about the iron rod in a roundabout manner for the past few days. Is she finally unable to hold it in any longer? That is the supreme masterpiece of the dwarf race, the compressed version of the god-slaying canon, Red Clouds. The Dwarf King crossed his arms in front of his chest and glanced at Aisha, looking proud of himself. A treasure passed down from generation to generation. Even you have not seen it, right? There are too few opportunities for the dwarf race to be proud in front of this woman. Once there was one, they would not miss it. Can that iron rod kill the warlord? Aisha didn't care about the Dwarf King's attitude. She was a little concerned about the name of this thing. Why would a killing weapon that could threaten the #1 expert of the human race be named so? I don't think so. The Dwarf King said, but it should be able to beat him half to death. Anyway, as long as the warlord takes this hit, he will definitely not be able to defeat Jilin's clone. Why are you asking this? Then, can this thing kill a legend? Aisha asked. Oh, who do you want to kill? No, which legend dares to offend you? And if you want to kill someone, why don't you just ask Jilin to do it? Don't interrupt. A legend. Sword Saint should not be able to do it. Emperor Physique also should not be able to do it before. Now that he has lost an arm, he should be able to kill him. Holy Wall Jashu should not be able to do it either. The rest should not be a problem. Looks like you have been studying those legends a lot. As a king, you must always be prepared for war and anticipate the worst. Humans are the biggest threat to all the other races. They have many people and are greedy. I'm also a human. Aisha pointed at herself. Uffed. The Dwarf King almost laughed out loud. But when he saw that the orcs were carrying out their religious activities very devoutly, he felt that he shouldn't disturb them. So he quickly covered his mouth and whispered, "You're a human too?" "That's right. But didn't the Dwarf Kingdom and the Snow Wind Empire have a good relationship? One must always be on guard against others. This is a human principle. Those who are not of our race will have different intentions. This is also a human principle. My dwarf race feels that this is very reasonable." Aisha nodded and suddenly said, "How many of these do you have? What do you think? Just this one alone has almost emptied 2 generations of my dwarf race's savings. I'll trade with you." The Dwarf King suddenly turned his head and looked at Aisha. "Impossible. Did you suddenly become stupid? Don't speak too early. What's wrong? What's wrong? Where did the Beast King go?" Just when Aisha and the Dwarf King were whispering, the originally solemn Beastmen religious ceremony suddenly became noisy. Aisha held her breath and suddenly shut her mouth. The first thing she did was to open the magic crystal of the teleportation array that she had been holding in her hand. The Dwarf King also clenched a golden pendant. Then the two of them looked at each other and looked at the throne together. They saw that Jilin, who had been sitting on the throne, suddenly turned into a ball of flame. Then the ball of flame quickly became smaller and finally turned into a small flame. Then with a bang, it disappeared. This sound gave Aisha and the Dwarf King a fright. The two of them stared at the throne for a long time and found that there was indeed no more movement. Only then did they let out a sigh of relief. The two of them nervously turned their heads and looked at each other. They could see a trace of obvious fear in each other's eyes. "Is already starting, right?" the Dwarf King asked. "Should be. He finally has no energy left to maintain this clone." This means that he intends to give it his all, Aisha said. Can he succeed? That's a god. The dwarf king said anxiously. He should be able to. He's a dragon. Aisha said, moreover, if he's not completely confident, he shouldn't give up this clone. What you said makes sense. The dwarf king nodded. The Chinquin world. There was originally no life, only endless yellow sand blowing in a dead silence. The barren world seemed to have become lively now. From time to time, there were human-shaped things flying around in the sky, adding a trace of vitality to this dull world. The world was lively, naturally, not only because of Jilin's arrival. After all, this world was so big. If there were only him and that brainless god, it would not be lively no matter what those flying things were the bright snow god soldiers that Jilin had repaired these days. Those repaired bright snow god soldiers dug out the remains of their companions buried in the yellow sand from all over the world. Then they were sent to the mountain. On the mountaintop, Jilin was there, repairing the bright snow god soldiers that were sent over. His hands turned into two afterimages and landed on the broken bright snow divine weapon like raindrops. In a short while, a bright snow god soldier was repaired. After these few days, Jilin's speed of repairing the bright snow god soldiers had become very fast, and he was very familiar with it. At this time, even the dwarf king would shake his head and sigh at his own inferiority. This was the difference in the hierarchy of life. It was not something that could be overcome by human strength. After Jilin repaired the bright snow god soldier in his hands, he suddenly stopped and took a deep breath. Then, he let out a long roar. He had finally completed this extremely dull task, but he had to do it. A clear dragon roar sounded between heaven and earth, echoing through half of the Qianquan world. Countless bright snow god soldiers flew over from all directions and gathered in the sky above Jilin, covering the sky and the sun. Jilin roughly swept a glance and nodded his head, feeling that it was about time. There was a total of 6,723 bright snow god soldiers. According to the human's theory, it would take tens of thousands of bright snow god soldiers to kill a god. It should not be too much for him, a dragon, to be equivalent to 4,000 to 5,000 bright snow god soldiers. Furthermore, that god did not have a brain. Jilin glanced at the sky full of bright snow god soldiers and decided to take a nap first. After all, the opponent was a god, so he should be fully prepared. Jilin closed his eyes for 5 days. Although 5 days was a long time for humans, to the dragon race who could easily sleep for decades, it was really just a short nap to rest his mind. Jilin gave a big yawn and stretched his body. Then, he flapped his wings and flew towards the god again. This time, behind him were thousands of soldiers and horses. Thousands of bright snow god soldiers. This was a power that was enough to destroy heaven and earth. The Snow Wind Empire only had one bright snow god soldier, and the Iron Blood King felt that he could go against the Megalosaurus. And Jilin now had 6,723 of them. Jilin felt that he could torture the god to death. The red Megalosaurus flew over from the horizon, bringing with it countless red-eyed, humanoid mechanical life forms that covered the sky. From afar, it looked like an evil army from the underworld that attacked the heavens. The god whose body was covered in yellow, transparent crystals raised his head. He could feel Jilin's arrival, but he did not have any reaction because he did not have a brain. Jilin was also not as senseless as humans, who like to say some ruthless words before a battle. Furthermore, this was just a god's body without consciousness. Therefore, Jilin simply raised his hand. The 6,723 bright snow divine soldiers all raised their hands towards God. Countless red light pillars shot towards the god. An incomparably violent rumbling sound echoed. The sound was loud enough to cover any thunder in the world. The earth was trembling. It split into pieces, and the mountain peak in the distance collapsed. The yellow sand in the sky all year round had long disappeared, and even the white clouds and fog had disappeared without a trace. The entire universe world was shaking. It was as if someone was holding it and shaking it with all their might. Jilin stuck out his tongue and licked his sharp fangs ferociously. He was quite satisfied with the results of his work. Chapter 179. Countless Ming Shui god soldiers surrounded the god, forming a perfect semicircle. Furthermore, they continuously launched their most powerful attacks. Even Jilin was speechless when he saw the scene in the semicircle. He felt that if a god could even withstand this, it would be too unreasonable. Suddenly, a Ming Shui god soldier that was about to run out of energy charged into the semicircle, charging towards the dazzling ball of light. That ball of light was enough to obliterate all matter in the world, including the body of the Ming Shui god soldier. Jilin was stunned. This was not his will. It was the action of the Ming Shui god soldier. Just as Jilin was puzzled, an even brighter and bigger ball of light suddenly appeared in the original ball of light. However, it disappeared in an instant. Jilin could feel that it was the self-destruction of the Ming Shui god soldier. It seemed that when these things were first built, they were given the command to self-destruct once the energy approached. Jilin guessed. However, if Jilin guessed correctly, how could there be so many remains of the Ming Shui god soldier in the heaven and earth world? Could it be that in front of the enemy in that war, an ultimate weapon like the Ming Shui god soldier could not even self-destruct? Just as Jilin was deep in thought, even more Ming Shui god soldiers flew towards the god and self-destructed. The intense light produced by the explosion was enough to blind people's eyes. The strong wind that was stirred up blew away the yellow sand that had accumulated for countless years, gradually revealing the original stone ground. Soon, everything was settled. Like the strong wind and rain dissipating, the clear sky and white clouds appeared. The world became silent again. In this world, at this moment, the only things that could move were Jilin and the god. Jilin held the huge sword and stood on the hard ground, looking down at the god. The god's body was originally slightly taller than Jilin. The reason why Jilin could look down on the god was because there was a pit under the god's feet, a very deep pit. The god, who was as tall as a mountain, could fit half of his body into it. Deity's body was still dazzling, crystal clear and bright. But now, it looked rather miserable because God's body was covered with countless cracks of various sizes. And the biggest crack was at God's neck. The crack was very long and deep, making God's neck look like it was half broken. It was like an executioner had chopped off a person's head, but because he had not sharpened the knife beforehand, he had not completely chopped it off. It was a shocking sight. That was the proof of the existence of over 6,000 Ming Shui soldiers. This was the damage they had done to God at the cost of everything they had. Jilin grinned. He brandished the huge sword twice and aimed at the crack, chopping down with the force of a thunderbolt. Crack! The sound of something extremely hard breaking could be heard. God's head was really chopped off. The transparent and round head was like a huge crystal ball, drawing a pitiful parabola in the air before crashing to the ground. Dust flew everywhere, something like a head being chopped off, even if it happened to the dragon race, meant that it was cold to the bone or dead to the point of no return. However, if it were a god, it would be a completely different matter. To God, something like losing a body part was not worth mentioning, no matter if it was an arm or a head. It was the same. Jilin was also very clear about this matter. So when God lost his head, but still did not feel anything and rushed out of the pit with his fist raised, Jilin was not surprised at all. To God, the only thing that was really important was the God's soul, which was the core. The head was just a decoration. Jilin casually put away the broken huge sword, flapped his wings twice as if he was stretching his muscles and bones, and then roared to boost his momentum, and then rushed towards deity. Humans were the creatures that respected nature the most, but also the creatures that did not respect nature the most. Humans called the land mother. They called the sea mother and the river mother. Although it was a little frivolous to have many mothers, it also showed the respect and attachment of humans to nature. So, humans respected nature. As for the reason that humans did not respect nature, it was because humans did not get permission from these mothers when they recognized them. North of the Snow Wind Empire, in the land of eternal night ice, humans had an almost instinctive greed for land. This was the consensus of all races except humans. However, humans felt that it was because of their deep love for the land. In short, whether it was yearning for love or greed, humans always had a need and yearning for land. So, humans would instinctively occupy and use land to the maximum extent. Logically speaking, with the strength of humans in this world, they should have taken the whole world as their own long ago. However, since the era of the gods, the territory of the human race had not increased at all. It had always been the same size. This was because the territory of humans was surrounded by forbidden areas. It was as if God had used the forbidden areas to draw a circle around humans and encircled them. Although this circle was very big, humans could not take a step out of it. It was no different from the fish that humans kept in a big tank. The so-called forbidden areas were places that humans absolutely could not go, because they would die if they went there. In the endless sea in the east, there were countless marine species. Without ships, they could only travel long distances in the endless sea. Humans did not have the talent to survive in the water. In a wasteland in the south, there would be strange sandstorms that would cover the sky from time to time. Humans who walked in this sandstorm would quickly be weathered. And this sandstorm had no effect on creatures with rough skin and thick flesh, or creatures with scales and feathers to protect their bodies. In the west, the temperature of the volcanoes was extremely high. It was not suitable for humans to live in. Moreover, the air of the volcanoes contained a large amount of sulfur and various poisonous gases. Ordinary humans would lose their lives if they breathed in a few breaths. Only very few strong humans could pass through the volcanoes and reach the legendary nest of the megalosaurus. They would embark on a thrilling legendary adventure and finally lose their lives there. Finally, there was the ice field in the north. The natural temperature of the ice field was extremely low, but this was not the most fatal problem because humans had already overcome the low temperature of nature. The real problem was that there was no sun in the ice field. For some reason, the sun's rays could never shine into the ice field, and sunlight was the most basic condition for humans to live. Because there was no sunlight, humans called this place the eternal night ice field. The eternal night ice field was just like its name. An endless layer of ice covered the ground, and there was a thick layer of snow on top of it. All year round, there was a snowstorm that was several times more violent than the one in the Snow Wind Empire. The wind whistled and was as cold as knives. This was a true forbidden area for life. No life had set foot in this place for tens of thousands of years. Dead silence. This was a true dead silence. Suddenly, a golden light appeared in the endless snowstorm. Then the light shone brightly. The light became more and more intense, and in the end, it was as if the sun had fallen to the ground. This might be the first time such a bright light shone on the ice field since the birth of the world. The dazzling light slowly dispersed, and the huge Jilin appeared out of thin air on the ice field. Jilin glanced at the surroundings in a daze. He thought to himself, "This scene looks very familiar." Jilin's wings moved slightly, and he felt a little pain. There was also some extremely bright red blood dripping from his wings. In the end, he was still a god. Even though Jilin had completely transformed his wings into two sturdy shields, he was still unable to completely block that final punch. This was the first time Jilin had suffered such a serious injury. The red dragon's blood dripped onto the snowy ground, and it suddenly emitted a terrifying heat. The snowy ground within 100 meters evaporated, and large amounts of mist rose into the air, revealing the deep blue layer of ice beneath the snowy ground. Jilin's blood was still dripping onto the ice, and then the ice began to melt, and a lake appeared. Jilin snorted lightly. He was a fire dragon, and it was in his nature to dislike water. Just as Jilin was about to change to another place, a black humanoid figure suddenly floated across the lake beside Jilin's feet. Jilin was excited, and he casually scooped it up. He didn't expect that someone had actually come to this broken place before. Jilin glanced at the thing in his hand and was slightly stunned. He then turned it over and over again. If it was just a bunch of frozen human corpses, of course, it wouldn't be worth Jilin's careful observation. Therefore, this corpse wasn't ordinary. It wasn't a human corpse at all. It was a humanoid creature, and its entire body was dark blue, a dark blue that was close to black. This corpse was wearing armor, and there was a broken short sword in its chest. It seemed like this guy didn't freeze to death. Jilin pondered for a moment, and then flapped his undamaged wing. A gust of wind swept over, and in an instant, it suppressed the snow that was originally between heaven and earth. It blew away the snow in front of Jilin and revealed a clean and flat blue layer of ice. Jilin's eyes lit up with a golden light, and his line of sight pierced through the layer of ice and looked into the depths. Under the ice, there were densely packed blue humanoid figures everywhere. Moreover, there were countless of them. Just looking at them would make one's scalp go numb and one's hair stand on end. Fortunately, Jilin wasn't human, so he didn't have any reaction, but he felt a little bad. Jilin decisively decided not to think about these things, and casually threw the corpse in his hand to the side, got up, and flew towards the south. Less than an hour after Jilin flew away, the blue corpse's fingers suddenly moved, and then it opened its eyes. Then, it violently gasped for breath, and white air spurted out from its mouth and nose. After its breathing stabilized, the blue corpse calmly pulled out the short sword in its chest, and then began to steadily and frequently knock on the ice surface. Ding, ding, ding. Thank you for subscribing to my collection. Many thanks. Chapter 180. In the easternmost part of the world, in a vast, endless sea, there was a small island that seemed to be everywhere. It stood in the depths of the sea. The only thing that made this island different was that the plants on this island were much more lush than other ordinary islands. They were full of vitality, and there were birds chirping and flowers blooming everywhere. It made the entire island look verdant. This was the world-famous Elven Island. There was a pure white temple on Elven Island, and there were 5 holy orbs enshrined inside. The holy orbs shone with red, green, blue, gold, yellow, and other colors. The temple was heavily guarded by soldiers. They were not guarding against any enemies because no one had been able to set foot on Elven Island for so many years. They only had one purpose here, and that was to keep an eye on these 5 orbs. Duran glanced at the golden orbs, adjusted the position of the longsword at his waist, and then yawned out of boredom. He felt very bored now, because in his eyes, guarding the holy orbs was really meaningless. He was now 753 years old, but in the past 753 years of his life, these holy orbs that were said to be related to the fate of the world never showed any abnormalities. They were just like 5 ordinary glass orbs that only glowed. Duran, you're slacking off. Suddenly, a slender female elf with sparkling eyes jumped in front of Serene. Her face looked as if it was carved by the gods, but she had a hint of naivety about her. She put her hands on her hips and said angrily, looking very cute. Duran had already found a thick tree branch and was lying on it lazily, planning to take a nap. Duran was startled when he suddenly heard someone calling him, and immediately sat up straight. Then, he glanced at the person who had come and heaved a sigh of relief. Then, he lay back down leisurely. Oh, it's Lena. You scared me. Duran smiled, but he did not look scared at all. You dare to lie down. If you don't get up, what are you going to do? I'm going to tell the queen. I'm going to tell the queen that you're slacking off. With your guts, I think you won't even dare to speak to the queen. Lena pointed at Serene angrily. Her adorable face was flushed red, making her look even more alluring. What about me? Serene rested her head on her arms and glanced at Lena from the corner of her eyes, provocatively. Do you dare? I wouldn't dare either. Nonsense. Many people saw you talking to the queen that day. Don't mention it. That was the day the queen came to the temple and happened to pass by the area I was in charge of. She waved at me and asked me a few questions. Then why did you say you didn't dare? I don't dare, but if the queen asks, I don't dare to not answer. That's true. What did the queen say to you? I forgot. You forgot. Have you forgotten that the queen is talking to you? I was scared out of my wits that day. What the queen said after that. What I said, I don't remember at all. I heard that the queen has a type of magic that can restore people's memories. Stop. Serene abruptly sat up, her aura suddenly increasing. An aura filled with natural energy quietly spread out, causing the surrounding plants to sway incessantly. That was the sound of the plants cheering. Serene only needed to leak a little of her aura to cause the surrounding environment to resonate with her, an elf that had lived for more than 700 years. If she had to use a word to describe her strength in the human world, it would be shocking. Lena was shocked by Serene. She thought that her words had offended the queen and made Serene unhappy. So she quickly said, I was just talking nonsense. Don't take it seriously. How could the queen use magic on us? No, look. Serene's face was full of shock as she pointed behind Lena. Lena looked back blankly, thinking that there was nothing on the elf island that was worth Serene's fuss. With just a glance, Lena could not help but cover her mouth with both hands as she exclaimed. She saw that among the 5 sacred orbs enshrined in the temple, the golden one had completely lost its glow, and the blue sacred orb had a tiny crack on it at some point. Lena looked back at Serene, not knowing what to do. Stay here and don't move. Don't let anyone come near. I'll go inform the queen. As soon as Serene finished speaking, he leaped into the forest and disappeared. Okay, Lena shouted in the direction Serene left. That aura was like a human making a vow. Lena raised her hands high and a green glow appeared on her body. The forest started moving as if it had come alive. Countless vines came out of the forest and surrounded the temple layer by layer, forming a wall that was 2 to 3 meters high. From now on, no matter who wanted to cross this wall, they would suffer Lena's fiercest attack. Serene moved forward in the forest as if he was flying. His speed was as fast as an arrow that had just left the bow. The surrounding scenery quickly receded and became a blurry shadow in Serene's eyes. Although Serene could not see the road clearly, he did not slow down at all because the forest would guide him. Serene wiped the cold sweat on his forehead as he ran. Of course, he was not tired from running, but because he was extremely nervous. It was said that the Saint Pearl, which had been worshipped in the temple, had remained stable for thousands of years without the slightest change. But today there was suddenly a problem. 2 sacred orbs were broken. Serene had not thought about how to tell the queen about this. After a while, Serene rushed to the entrance of the Elven Palace like a gust of wind. The Elven Palace was a group of pure white palaces that looked like ancient ruins. It did not look big, unlike the human palaces that looked breathtaking and majestic from afar. However, the Elven Palace appeared to be ingenious in every detail, exquisite and elegant. Only the elves would know what kind of a different world it was inside. Serene did not stop and walked directly to the palace without any obstruction. Of course, there were no guards in the Elven Palace. Every elf could enter and leave the palace at will, because the Elven Queen was the most powerful being in the world. She did not need any protection, and there were no outsiders on the Elven Island. The Elven Queen did not need to act like a human emperor and put on a show for others. Serene walked quickly to the main hall of the palace. As he passed through the long corridor, the elves who came and went nodded at him, but Serene was not in the mood to respond to them one by one. He walked past them without looking back. Although it was rude, fortunately, he and the elves had known each other for hundreds of years, so no one took offense. They only felt that it was strange. Serene walked into the main hall of the palace just like that. The main hall was very spacious, but there was a blue spring and an incomparably green tree. It was very quiet and peaceful. Dressed in white, the incomparably noble and beautiful Elven Queen sat on the throne. Her perfect eyes quietly looked at Serene, as if she already knew that he would come at this time. When Serene saw the queen, his breath suddenly stopped. Then, he quickly knelt on one knee and said, "Your Majesty, the sacred orb has changed." The Elven Queen did not react in surprise when she heard that, as if she had already expected it. She slowly got up from the throne, as if she had come alive from a painting. Some humans said that there was nothing perfect in the world. This sentence was regarded as the truth by countless humans. However, the elves would not agree with this sentence, because their queen was such a perfect being. It's fine. The elven queen kindly helped Serene up. She gently waved her hand, and the wrinkles and dust on his body were removed. She looked as natural as a mother treating her own son. This was not a method used by human emperors to win over people's hearts. It was because the queen had watched Serene grow up. No, it should be said that on the Elven Island, every elf under the age of 1,000 was watched by the queen as they grew up. Serene was at a loss, but he still said, "Your Majesty, that's the sacred orb." "It's fine. It's just that what should happen will happen," the elven queen said calmly, as if something as big as the sacred orb that the elves had guarded for 1,000 years would not cause a ripple in her heart. It's been like this for 1,000 years. There's nothing to be surprised about. What should happen? Only in a chaotic world will heroes appear. What do you mean? The god of light's messenger is coming to the Elven Island, wanting to obtain unparalleled power. This, how do you know? A few days ago, the god of light showed up at all costs to inform me about this matter. The elven queen casually pointed at the blue spring. Oh, Serene nodded blankly, not knowing what to say. Although the queen's words had many questions worth pondering, the biggest thought in his mind was that the rumor of the spring of life being able to contact the gods was actually true. If a hero obtains power, he will definitely use it. To use such power, he needs a huge stage. A chaotic world filled with war is just right, the elven queen said softly. Her pleasant voice seemed to contain countless memories of the past. The gods have already arranged everything in their hearts. Serene did not know why, but when he heard this, he shivered. The elven queen saw this and smiled. This smile seemed to make the world dim. She gently stroked Theron's hair and said softly, "Don't be afraid. Even if it's God, this world won't do as they wish." Thank you for subscribing, favoriting, recommending, and encouraging comments from some of my friends. Thank you. Chapter 181. Currently, no one knew what kind of changes had happened to the world that caused the elven race's sacred orb to suddenly become abnormal. No one knew what kind of storm was brewing in the world for those sacred orbs to quietly break. People continued to live their lives peacefully. They were busy with their 3 meals a day and did not have the leisure to care about the life and death of the human race. However, even if people knew about it, they probably would not care too much. After all, what did the fate of the world have to do with them? Even if tomorrow was the end of the world, they still had to eat today. Middle Empire, capital city. It had been more than a month since Bane stabbed the Golden King in the Imperial Palace and caused a commotion in the city. In this 1 month, although the security in the capital had become exceptionally tight, it was also very abnormally peaceful. There were no longer any princes who started a rebellion. It seemed that things had calmed down. The third prince, let me tell you, you didn't see it. That sword strike of mine back then was truly earth-shattering, godly, and untraceable. In an ordinary courtyard in the capital, Bane was beaming with joy, his saliva flying everywhere as he described his stunning sword strike to the third young master in an extremely exaggerated manner. He talked about how he disregarded the danger and avenged the third prince. He talked about how loyal he was to his brother and how he could not vent his anger on him just because Jilin kidnapped him. The third prince smiled like a flower and listened with great interest. He seemed to be very happy that his father was stabbed by someone. Although in the past month, Ben had repeated this matter over and over again almost 180 times, Sword Saint sat on the throne and gently blew away the small foam on the teacup. However, he did not drink it. On the second day after leaving the Imperial Palace, Sword Saint and Bane found this courtyard under the guidance of a group of heroes. More than a month had passed. The third prince had stayed in this place for more than a month. This was not something a prince who had declared his rebellion should do. Sword Saint didn't believe that the Golden King hadn't grasped the position of the third prince after staying in one place for more than a month. But since they already knew the location, and yet no one had kicked open the door of this courtyard, this matter was worth thinking about. There were only 2 reasons why they didn't act rashly, even though they knew where the enemy was. Either that, or they were afraid of breaking the vases. Either that, Or they had other plans and were planning to cast a long line to catch a big fish. Lord Sword Saint, why aren't you drinking? Is the tea cold? Shueqing asked softly as she stood beside the Sword Saint. She looked a little shy and careful, as if she was a newly married daughter-in-law who was serving her in-laws for the first time. Oh, it's nothing. After Sir Sword Saint finished speaking, he drank the tea in one gulp, indicating that there was nothing wrong with the tea. After Sir Sword Saint finished drinking the tea, he said to Shueqing, "Sit." Shueqing sat down properly. As expected of someone who came from the palace, her every action was in accordance with etiquette. "You don't need to be so restrained," Sword Saint said with a smile. "That's right, we're not outsiders." The third prince agreed with a carefree tone. Shueqing couldn't help but roll her eyes. Before Sir Sword Saint came, the third prince was still decent. But when Sir Sword Saint came, for some reason, the third prince suddenly became a hedonistic son of rich parents. Sword Saint also glared at the third prince, but didn't pay attention to him. Instead, he said to Shueqing, "I know about you. I've known about you for a long time. Originally, I thought that you were an excuse you came up with because she didn't want to come to Sword Mountain. I didn't expect it to be true." Shueqing was a bit confused. She didn't know what Sir Sword Saint meant, but she didn't dare to ask directly. "I've been paying attention to you for a long time, so I know that you're not an ordinary girl," Sword Saint said. "You were once set up as zither in public in order to pursue you. But I didn't expect that you would come out with a sword and cut off 5 strings of you zither. What a heroine. You're truly worthy of being chosen by Li Zheng to be in charge of monitoring the princes. You're really amazing. But it's a pity that my Guy family's Polonia 7-string zither has been passed down for generations." Shueqing blinked her large eyes. How should she respond to this? Fortunately, Shueqing wasn't the only one here. If she couldn't respond, there was someone else who could. The situation wouldn't be awkward. "That zither was passed down for generations in your family? Why haven't I heard you mention it?" Bane was surprised and asked in a low voice. "My family has many things passed down for generations. It's not rare," the third prince said indifferently. His meaning was naturally to tell Shueqing that it was just a zither. If she cut it, then so be it. It wasn't a big deal. The third prince's words were said casually, making it seem extremely awesome. Moreover, he had the confidence to say this. Whether it was his mother's Guy family or his Li family, they all had many things passed down for generations. A zither really wasn't a big deal. Logically speaking, there was nothing wrong with the third prince's words. But the problem was that this world sometimes didn't talk about reason. For example, a very cheap thing could be treated as a treasure by some people. It was unreasonable for some people to regard something so insignificant as more important than their own lives. Therefore, the third prince's words made Sword Saint very unhappy. Sword Saint looked at the third prince and said in a low voice, "That zither was your mother's favorite when she was alive. Oh, then what do you think we should do? Let Shueqing pay with her life for that zither." The third prince didn't lose out to Sword Saint at all and glared back. The third prince's imposing manner was good, but his words were too impulsive. It wasn't something a man should say. Even Bane couldn't bear to listen to it. "Bastard!" Sword Saint's fingers tightened slightly, and the teacup in his hand turned into powder. The powder fell through the gaps between Sword Saint's fingers. Sword Saint took a deep breath and suppressed his anger. He said to the third prince, "What do you mean? What do you want?" "Uncle, I've grown up," the third prince said seriously. Sword Saint frowned. He didn't know what his nephew was up to. He looked Liu up and down, then looked at Shueqing and said, "I'm not blind. You've been staying in my courtyard for more than a month." "That's right. There's no one else here. There's no problem of the walls having ears. Moreover, with your realm, no one can eavesdrop on you. Do I need you to tell me that? Then shouldn't you take this opportunity to tell me something?" "I see. I was wondering why you were acting so strange recently. So you had something on your mind? All right. Although I don't think there's anything you should know, but I didn't tell you. But since you said so, then I'll ask. What do you want to know?" "My mother, how did she die?" Sword Saint didn't say anything. He just kept looking at the third prince. His gaze was deep, deep and focused. The third prince wasn't afraid at all. Facing Sword Saint's sword-like gaze, he still didn't avoid it. Then he vomited blood. "The third prince, are you okay?" Bane saw the third prince vomiting blood and immediately rushed forward to support the third prince. This was the first time he saw the third prince suffer such a serious injury. Even when the third prince was held hostage by Jilin, he was unharmed. He didn't expect that today he would be injured by his own uncle. Xueqing also silently appeared behind the third prince. She gently stroked his back to help him breathe. Although the third prince vomited blood, he still stubbornly looked at Sword Saint. Bane thought to himself, if you're already vomiting blood, then stop looking. He wanted to press the third prince's head down, but he didn't succeed. On the other hand, Sword Saint blinked twice when he saw the third prince vomiting blood and looked away. "You've really grown up." Sword Saint walked over and patted the third prince's shoulder. At the same time, he dispelled the sword aura that accidentally injured the third prince. "But I can't tell you this now. It's useless even if you know." The third prince heard this and didn't continue to fool around. Instead, he asked seriously, "Then when can I tell you?" "When you completely control the Middle Empire." Sword Saint said, "That's too difficult, and it'll take too long." The third prince shook his head. "I'll help you." Sword Saint took the handkerchief Xueqing handed to him and wiped the blood from the third prince's mouth. To completely control the Middle Empire, this isn't enough. The third prince still shook his head. "Then this old man will also help the third prince." "I wonder if it's enough?" An old voice suddenly sounded. The third prince, Bane, and Xueqing all turned to look at the door. Only Sword Saint smiled knowingly. They saw the Minister of Rites, Mr. Ouyang, walking in slowly. Mr. Ouyang. Mister, how did you find this place?" The third prince saw Ouyang Ju. At first, he was pleasantly surprised, but then he was puzzled. Ouyang Ju chuckled. "Everyone says that this old man has students all over the world. Do you think that's a lie?" "Of course not. But most of us here are people from all walks of life. I didn't think that there would be a disciple of Mister's." The third prince said, "There's no discrimination in education after all." Ouyang Ju said, "Mister is indeed extraordinary." The third prince clasped his fists. "Do I need you to tell me that?" Ouyang Ju seemed very proud. "Right? What did Mister say when you came in?" "This student was too excited and didn't hear you clearly." "I'm sorry. I hope Mister can teach me again." The third prince said, "Oh, I said that I'll help you to ascend the throne and rebel against your father. If you're worried that you won't be able to control the imperial court, no problem. This old man will help you hold the fort. You can do it without worry." Ouyang Ju said very heroically. It was as if he was pointing out the country, and he was full of vigor. It was as if as long as he said that the third prince's throne would be secured, Bane and the third prince were stunned. Only Sword Saint smiled and nodded repeatedly. "Thank you for your recommendation tickets, favorites, and subscriptions." "Thank you." Chapter 182. Aren't you being too hasty?" The third prince was dumbfounded. He had no idea what Lord Ouyang was up to. This was probably the first time in history that someone was so brazenly trying to help a prince rebel. What's so hasty about this? The third prince was hesitant. Mr. Ouyang, on the other hand, was fuming. He felt that it was unreasonable for the third prince to be so wishy-washy, even though he was being so straightforward. Do you really think that I can successfully rebel against my father with those Jianghu heroes?" The third prince asked. "You know that it won't work, so why are you sticking your neck out?" Ouyang Ju asked. "If it weren't for His Excellency Sword Saint, I'm afraid that you would have been tied up by His Majesty and locked up in some side chamber. My uncle is Sword Saint. Who dares to touch me?" The third prince grabbed Sword Saint's hand and said confidently, "That's right." Mr. Ouyang was not angered by the third young master's useless behavior. Instead, he was very pleased and praised him. "Because your uncle is a Sword Saint, your chances of successfully rebelling are the highest. This is an obvious problem. But even if my uncle succeeds in taking the throne, I may not be able to govern the country well." The third prince said, "My brothers who want to be emperor have all been diligent since they were young. They know the languages of various countries and are familiar with the daily life of the people in the empire. If you look at me again, I don't know anything. I only know how to do some romantic things." If you don't know anything, I can teach you. Don't be afraid, Ouyang Ju said. But the third prince was about to say something when Sword Saint interrupted him. What are you afraid of? Sword Saint asked with a frown. He did not believe that the third prince did not have the slightest desire to be emperor. No matter what, half of the Li family's blood flowed in his body. The third prince was silent for a while. Finally, he sighed as if he had given up and said, Actually, I didn't expect this rebellion to succeed. I just wanted to join in the fun and give my old man some trouble. It would be best if I could startle him and give him a ruthless beating to relieve the hatred in my heart. After all, I also have the blood of the Li family, so I have to rebel. The third prince's words gave Bane a shock. He thought to himself, what kind of traditional upbringing does the third prince have? What do you mean by you have to rebel? What did he mean by joining in the fun? What? Is it the responsibility and duty of the Li clan's descendants to rebel? Although Bane had a lot of things to say in his heart, he saw the serious faces of the other three, as if they were saying, You have a point, please continue. Bane held back. But since a month ago, when Uncle stepped into this courtyard, everything has changed. If I were to rebel now, it might really succeed. The third prince hesitated for a while before continuing. If Uncle helps me, my old man might die. The third prince's words had been evasive, making people feel a little confused. It was only until the last sentence that he got to the point, the core of everything. So this was the reason why the third prince's rebellion suddenly stopped with the arrival of Sword Saint. It was actually because the third prince was worried about his emperor father. You! Sword Saint's eyes widened. He pointed at the third prince, his fingers trembling. He was now really doubting whether this Li Yu was really his sister and Li Zheng's child. Could it be that his sister was so fierce that she could steal a man in the palace, right under the emperor's nose? It shouldn't be. But if it wasn't, it didn't make sense. How could a child of the Li family say something like this? Sword Saint was so shocked by the third prince's words that he started to doubt his own sister. On the other hand, Ouyang Ju was laughing heroically at the side. The third prince is really a rare person in the royal family. With such a benevolent heart, why worry about the prosperity of the kingdom? Even Xueqing was comforted and used her finger to gently wipe the tears from the corner of her eyes. Only Bane. He was really shocked. He stared at this group of people with his mouth agape. He thought to himself, shouldn't the third prince's words be taken for granted? What's there to be surprised about? Why do you look like you've seen a pig speak human language? Sword Saint stuttered for a long time, but he still couldn't say anything. Ouyang Ju pressed down on Sword Saint's hand, indicating that he would take care of this matter. In the records of the Middle Empire's rebellions, there is no precedent of regicide. We don't want to risk the world's condemnation. You can rest assured about this. Ouyang Ju said. No. The third prince still shook his head. I'm afraid that when the time comes, I won't be able to control myself. What do you mean? This time, it was Ouyang Ju's turn to be confused. Sir, you know what kind of people I've been in contact with all these years. That's why I know some things that very few people know. The third prince said. For example? Ouyang Ju asked seriously, as if he wasn't ashamed to ask. For example, fighting and seeking revenge on the streets. The third prince said, Sir, you should know that during a gang fight, if the other party is 10 times stronger than me, then our brothers won't be seriously injured, and there won't be any deaths, causing trouble for everyone. That's because at that time, the other party will have the energy and leisure to spare. A group of people will pin someone to the ground, making him unable to fight back. Each person will give him a few punches and kicks, and then they will fiercely ask him if he's willing to submit. The beaten person will lie on the ground, hold his head tightly, and curl up into a ball. He'll either be beaten on the butt or the back. Although it hurts a little, it's not a serious injury. After he gets up and says he's willing to submit, that's all. In fact, if there isn't any deep hatred and it's just a fight for benefits, the most intense fights are between people of similar strength. Both sides feel that they can win if they put in a little more effort, so they fight more and more fiercely until they can't hold back anymore. It's reasonable for them to accidentally kill someone. You mean, unless you have overwhelming strength and can take care of His Majesty's life, you won't rebel? Ouyang was very good at finding metaphors in stories. How arrogant! The Sword Saint finally spoke. Since ancient times, when has a rebellion not been fraught with danger? Where did you get the confidence to win? Li Zheng is still the emperor of the Middle Empire. Who dares to say that they have the confidence to win? Bane saw everything clearly from the side. He felt that the third prince was very likely to become the emperor now. He had been in the Middle Empire for so long. He knew what kind of strength the two people in front of him had in the Middle Empire. After that, Mr. Ouyang assisted the third prince in governing the country. Before that, the world's #1 legend, Sword Saint, was willing to fight for the third prince. The news of the rebellion had already spread, and the whole world knew about it. Everything had been prepared. The only thing missing was that the third prince wasn't ruthless enough. As long as the third prince dared to make up his mind, he was afraid that a large-scale rebellion would begin immediately. As the saying goes, everything is ready except for the east wind. If you think that your current strength is still not enough, my Sword Mountain has 3,000 disciples. Sword Saint gave the first hint of the east wind. I've already accounted for that. The third prince said to Sword Saint with a cheeky smile, "We're all family. I can't be polite with you. If that's the case, does that mean you can count my 7 personal disciples as well?" Sword Saint asked. Of course, Brother Zhao Qi's senior brothers and sisters are also family. The third prince said, "They're all very arrogant. If I don't say anything, will they help you?" Sword Saint said, "Of course, I'm your nephew." The third prince said. Sword Saint held his forehead and sighed. He was really speechless. If the great Sword Saint was helpless, then there were probably very few people in the world who could do anything about it. Even Ouyang had a worried frown. Just as Bane was thinking, did these people do it? Is it something a human would do? Suddenly, an incomparably clean, slender, and perfect hand appeared behind him and patted him on the shoulder. Bane was startled and turned around abruptly. As a thief, he was good at ambushing others from behind, so he was naturally very sensitive to behind him. Even when Sword Saint was standing behind him on the roof of the palace, he was also able to feel it. However, he didn't have any premonition about this slap. Who was it? Bane turned around and saw the smiling face of a young man. He had red hair and golden eyes. "Dear bosses and friends, please recommend me. Please add me. Thank you. Thank you." Chapter 183. Ever since Jilin fell into the Middle Empire's trap and fell into the Great Qiankuan Formation, Bane had imagined countless times that Jilin would come looking for him. A red megalosaurus descending from the sky, bringing with it a sky full of flames, wantonly destroying the human cities, just to find one person. All right, this statement was somewhat pretentious, but it was indeed the most realistic guess. Jilin was such a prideful being, but he was carelessly set up by a human. What kind of shame and humiliation was this? How could Jilin not take revenge? Wouldn't it be normal for him to burn down half of the capital while looking for him? Bane had even thought of how to persuade Jilin to let go of the remaining half of the capital. Bane had thought of many things, but he never thought that there would be such a situation, where Jilin silently appeared behind him and patted him on the shoulder without alerting anyone. It would be wrong to say that no one was alerted. At the very least, everyone in the room was shocked. The Sword Saint instantly assumed a sword-drawing posture, holding the virtual sword in his hand, ready to attack. Then, the Sword Saint glanced at the third prince, thought for a moment, and returned to his usual posture. This enemy was not someone he could defeat alone. Ouyang looked at Jilin and thought, is this the public enemy of all humans? Why does he look so familiar? Jilin, why are you here? Bane asked. To look for you. Jilin grabbed Bane and moved his head left and right to see if it was tampered with by a human. Why did he become so stupid after not seeing him for a few days? No. What I mean is, why did you come here so stealthily? This is not your style. Bane asked. I'm a bit tired, Jilin said, and then casually found a table and chair to sit down. Brother Long, long time no see. The third prince greeted Jilin. A long time no see. Looks like you've been doing well. Jilin also nodded in response to the third prince, as if he did not remember that he had kidnapped someone. He had learned from Aisha's shamelessness completely. By the way, this greeting was learned from the Dwarf King. Hello, Prince Long. Xueqing also slightly bowed and greeted him. Miss Xueqing, Jilin replied, and then looked at the third prince. Looks like you've been doing well. It's all thanks to Brother Long. The third prince smiled. But Miss Xueqing, on account of our acquaintance, I have to remind you that the oath of a human male is trustworthy for a day, but it might not be after a day. If the third prince betrays you one day, I hope you can be mentally prepared, Jilin said seriously. Bane slapped his forehead as he listened at the side. He thought to himself, is this human language? That's right, I'm not human either. On the other hand, Xueqing did not have any abnormalities. She just smiled and said, thank you for the reminder, Prince Long. Jilin nodded. You? What's wrong with you? Bane looked at Jilin and asked with a frown. He felt that something was very wrong, because this was the first time he heard the word tire from Jilin's mouth. And Jilin looked a little listless. Jilin obviously understood Bane's meaning and said weakly, I'm a little injured, and then I flew nonstop for 9 days, so I'm a little tired. You're injured? Bane exclaimed. What can hurt you? Also, you flew for 9 days. Where the hell did you go? You only took half a day to fly from the Nanshin Empire to the Middle Empire. 9 days. You can travel everywhere, right? God, Jilin said with a smile. Also, the world is very vast, human. Okay, Bane acknowledged Jilin's words. Then you got the god spirit? Of course. Jilin grinned, which was exactly the same as Bane's smile before he assassinated the Emperor. How did you get out? Sword Saint looked at Jilin and asked in a deep voice. When Sword Saint and the Golden King came up with the plan, everyone in the Middle Empire thought that if everything went well, they should be able to trap the Red Disaster for a few years, giving humans time to breathe. But who knew that it would not even take 2 months? Jilin looked at Sword Saint and sneered. Without saying anything, he slowly raised a hand and extended a finger. Don't. Bane was shocked and rushed up to grab Jilin's wrist, desperately pushing it down. He was all too familiar with Jilin's action, but the scene was quite funny. No matter how hard Bane tried, Jilin's hand still did not move. It was like an ant trying to shake a tree. What are you doing? Jilin looked at him and asked in confusion. Bane did not say anything and only looked at Jilin. Jilin looked at Bane for a while and put down his hand in boredom. Phew. Everyone let out a sigh of relief. You won't let me kill them? Then let's go. Jilin stood up and said, Go. Where to? Bane was confused. To the wasteland, Jilin said. Why are we going to the wasteland? Isn't that the Beastman's territory? Of course, Aisha and Staya are in the wasteland, and the Dwarf King is there too. Aisha and Staya are in the wasteland. I heard that Beastmen eat humans. Is that so? Yes. No way. Humans don't taste good either. Why do you want to eat that? You've eaten them before? Bane's eyes almost popped out. I've tried too. I didn't eat them since they didn't taste good. Besides, what's so strange about me eating 1 or 2 humans? Then what's so strange about the Beastmen eating Staya and Aisha? Beastmen don't eat humans. I've never seen them eat humans. They even eat their own people when they're hungry. You humans eat humans when you're hungry too. Beastmen don't need to wait until they're hungry. Why can't you understand? Even if Beastmen eat humans, they won't eat my people. Why? You're not here now. Because I'm the king of Beastmen. Because Bane was stunned, and his hanging heart finally calmed down. He had nothing to say. This guy was not someone she could understand. She had known this for a long time. We can't leave now, Bane said. The third prince has already announced his rebellion. It's very dangerous now, Bane said. You. Jilin turned to look at the third prince, and suddenly felt like there was a ball of air in his chest. Jilin almost spat out a mouthful of dragon flames. He thought to himself that he wanted the third prince to rebel, but things didn't go as he expected. Now that he had the god spirit, why did he rebel? I don't care, Jilin said. Now we have to hurry up and go to the wasteland to forge the divine equipment. We don't have time to carry out the plan. Help the third prince ascend to the throne first. There's no need to rush. After all, we're all friends. This is a piece of cake for you, Bane said. No, Jilin said firmly. Why? Bane said. Now that Staya is unconscious, there's only Aisha by her side. I can guarantee that the beastmen won't eat her, but I can't guarantee that Aisha won't do anything to her. You know the relationship between the two of them. Also, you know Aisha's personality. Do you think she'll care if she takes advantage of others? So we have to go to the wasteland quickly. Jilin kept nodding as he spoke. He felt that he should be able to convince this stubborn human teenager. Staya, how did Staya faint? Bane immediately grasped the key point. Aren't you by her side? Who can hurt her right under your nose? Please add it to your collection. Please recommend it. Chapter 184. When it came to this question, Jilin felt a bit complicated. What's wrong with you? Why aren't you saying anything? Bane's voice was trembling. Did you hurt her? Jilin looked at Bane seriously and thought, when did this person's intuition become so sharp? If it was any sharper, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to keep him. Why would you think that? Jilin asked. Normally, you've been carefully watching over Staya and never let her be in danger. You've always kept her under your eyes. You said you were afraid that she would run away, but I think it's not just that. You're protecting her, so, under your careful watch, who else could hurt her other than yourself? Bane said. How did you find out? Jilin asked in surprise. When we were in the Snow Wind Empire, why did you insist on being on the same team as Staya? You wanted me to be on the same team as Aisha? You knew that I liked her. Bane's face turned red as he yelled. The third prince's eyes lit up as he listened. He thought, so Bro Bay is also a sentimental person. He actually likes the princess of the Saimai Empire. If this happens, wouldn't it be another beautiful story that will be passed down through the ages? Great. Even Xueqing had an interested look on her face. It seems that no matter where or what status a woman is from, they all like to gossip. This might be the rule of the world. I really don't know about this. Jilin blinked and looked at Bane. Plus, we've only been apart for a few days. Didn't you fall in love with another human woman? The one that's especially white. What's so strange about you liking someone? Xueqing looked at Bane with disdain in her eyes. The third prince was shocked. He thought, Bro Bay is indeed a sentimental person. Even Mr. Ouyang nodded at the side. He felt that his new disciple was quite intelligent. Her name is Gina. I'll have to trouble you to remember it for me. Bane resisted the urge to give Jilin a slap as he blushed and said, What's more, I'm not talking about this matter with you. What I'm asking now is, did you injure Staya? So what if I did? So what if I didn't? Jilin looked at Bane. You. Bane was so angry that he pulled out his steel sword in a fit of anger and used the sword move that the Sword Saint had created for him. Summon, no return. This was the name given by the Sword Saint because it was a sword technique with no return. There was no retreat, no defense, only offense. Either kill the enemy, or die the enemy. Its techniques, sword technique. The technique created by the Sword Saint must be very exquisite. It looks like a simple sword, but it actually contains countless moves. According to the Sword Saint, no one can dodge or block this sword. It's a sure-hit sword. The only flaw is that it's too ruthless. It's ruthless to the enemy and ruthless to oneself. If the enemy doesn't care about his life and counterattacks, the person who uses this technique will at least be seriously injured. Jilin looked at Bane's sword and felt that it's not easy to dodge. He stretched out his hand and easily grabbed Bane's sword. He gently bent it. It's not easy to dodge or block, but it doesn't mean that it's not easy to catch. Of course, other than Jilin, no one would use their hands to catch the enemy's sword. Kacha. Bane's sword broke like a withered branch. Jilin looked at Bane helplessly. He meant to say, if you have any other techniques, hurry up and use them. I already said that I'm very tired. Bane looked at the broken sword and then calmly placed it on the table. He wasn't surprised by this result. Instead, he felt that it was natural. Bane looked at Jilin and said, I'm just trying, your sword won't do. It's too slow. Sword Saint said. Then you do it. Jilin said. Sword Saint didn't say anything. He didn't even have a sword. Jilin saw that Sword Saint didn't say anything and ignored him. He looked at Bane and said, I don't want to hurt her. Are you coming with me or not? You have to help the third prince. Bane said stubbornly. During his time in the Middle Empire, Sword Saint and Mr. Ouyang had helped him a lot. How could he not repay their kindness? What do human matters have to do with me? Jilin asked. This. Bane was speechless for a moment. He didn't know what to say, because Jilin really didn't have any reason to help the third prince. He knew that in Jilin's eyes, the third prince's matter was as good as nothing. As for whether the third prince's life was in danger or whether he could live, it didn't make a difference either. Was there a big difference between living for 30 years and living for 100 years in Jilin's eyes? Not at all. In fact, it was negligible. A human in their 20s, no matter how one looked at it, was at the prime of their life. But to Jilin, a human at this age was a pitiful creature who had lived through 1/3 of a short life. And this was according to Jilin's calculation of a human's lifespan of 80 to 90 years. And some humans didn't even live to this age. For example, the sage of the Middle Empire once said, "I am at 15 years old and determined to learn. At 30 years old and determined. At 40 years old and determined. At 50 years old and knew my destiny. At 60 years old and obedient. At 70 years old and followed my heart." Why did he stop when he reached 70 years old? Because the sage didn't live to 80 years old. Jilin didn't understand at all. Why was it that the humans who thought they were young still didn't realize it when they only had 2/3 of their lifespan left? They even thought that there was still a long way to go. Jilin had once talked about this with Bane and the other two. Aisha, who had lived for more than 200 years, chuckled at that time. She said in a profound and uncharacteristic way, "You are not a fish. How can you know the joy of fish?" Jilin was baffled by his explanation. On the other hand, Tia nodded her head, which was a rare occurrence, and agreed with what Aisha said. She felt that there was no need to discuss the meaning of a human's life with a megalosaurus. Only Bane didn't say anything. He didn't know what to say either. It was also from that moment onwards that he suddenly realized that 1/3 of his life had already passed, and he didn't seem to have time to do anything. Because of the topic of Jilin, Bane didn't sleep well for a few days. In the end, he realized that it was a useless question to think about. Since it was useless to think about it, why should he think about it? But it was also at that time that Bane understood Jilin's real view of humans. He understood why Jilin could kill Miss Gina so easily. So Bane didn't know what to say now. "Brother Bay, don't make things difficult for Brother Long," the third prince said aloud. "This is a family matter of the Middle Empire. We shouldn't let outsiders interfere." Bane rolled his eyes at the third prince and said, "My surname isn't Bay." "Oh, excuse me. May I ask what your surname is?" The third prince immediately bowed and said pretentiously. Ben didn't respond to him. In the Simai Empire, not everyone had a surname. An orphan like him didn't have one. When the third prince bowed, he would lower his head. It wasn't too low, but it was convenient for people to fight. So, the third prince was hit on the head. It was Ouyang Ju who slapped the third prince's head and said angrily, "Stupid pedantic." The third prince held his head and looked at Ouyang Ju blankly with his big eyes. He thought to himself, "Isn't this the word your enemy uses to describe you? How can I be a disciple?" Now, the empire is in a precarious situation. The princes are in danger of dying. As the third prince of the empire, you should take up this responsibility. Ouyang Ju said. The third prince was a little dumbfounded. He thought to himself, "My brothers want to fight with their father for a chair. What does it have to do with me? It's already hard for me to hold my uncle back. Okay?" Ouyang Ju had taught the third prince for many years. He only needed to look at his expression to know what he was thinking. Moreover, the third prince's expression of, "It's none of my business," and "I can't do anything," was so obvious. As long as you sit on that chair, your brothers will stop fighting. It will also prevent generations of brothers from fighting against each other and the tragedy of father and son killing each other. Ouyang Ju said, "As long as the red disaster helps you, the throne will be at your fingertips. This is a matter for humans." Sword Saint suddenly said, "Moreover, the reason why the Empire is in such a precarious situation is because of him." Naturally, he was referring to the red disaster. The Empire can't fall into chaos at this time. Ouyang Ju stared at Sword Saint and said in a deep voice, The enemy that we thought would be trapped for a few years suddenly came out. You know what that means. Sword Saint was silent. This was indeed something unexpected. This unexpected thing even messed up the humans' overall plan. Sword Saint and Golden King didn't expect that the universe world would be filled with bright snow divine weapons. They also didn't expect that Jilin would actually know how to repair this thing. You can stop Sword Saint for a while, but you can't stop him forever. Ouyang Ju said, "This is a dead end. Now, His Majesty and Sword Saint have completely fallen out. If you don't rebel now, then one day, Sword Saint will drag you along with him. At that time, His Majesty and Sword Saint will either die or break the net." "I won't die," Sword Saint said. The third prince's entire face scrunched up. It was as if he was caught in an extremely painful struggle. There were some things he didn't want to do, but there were also some things he couldn't get rid of. For example, the fact that the emperor was his father. This was something that couldn't be helped. It was also a dead end. After a while, the third prince sighed as if he had given up. He said to Ouyang Ju, "Sir, when the time comes, you have to support me." Ouyang Ju also let out a sigh of relief. He solemnly bowed to the third prince and said in a deep voice, "I'll do my best until death do me part." This time, the third prince didn't dodge or avoid it. He firmly accepted this bow. At the side, Jilin had already grabbed Bane's lapel. It looked like he was too lazy to say anything and planned to take him away. "Brother Longwait," the third prince said, "listen to me." Chapter 185. What's wrong? Jilin looked at the third prince and asked, "Brother Long, do you know that there are 5 human empires in this world?" The third prince asked. Jilin nodded. Staya had taught him this before. "Since there are 5 empires, there will be 5 emperors," the third prince said. "Nonsense." Jilin frowned slightly. The 5 emperors each have their own emperor titles. Saimai Empire's Sacred King, Nanshin Empire's War King, Snow Wind Empire's Iron Blood King, Divine Dragon Empire's Hero King, and finally, the Middle Empire's Golden King. The third prince spoke as if he was starting a long story. "Are you done?" Jilin said, "I'm leaving. Hurry up and tell me." "Okay." The third prince nodded with a smile. 3 sentences. Jilin raised 3 fingers. The third prince's smile froze. Of course, each emperor title isn't obtained casually. They all have a great origin. 2 sentences. The Golden King is called the Golden King because the Middle Empire has a lot of gold. 1 last sentence. "Help me, and I'll give you gold." The third prince finished speaking. Seeing that Jilin didn't say anything, he added, "A lot of gold. Come here." Jilin waved at the third prince. The third prince walked over with a smile. Jilin smiled as well. He put his arm on the third prince's shoulder. He hugged the third prince's neck. Ouyang Ju and Sword Saint's eyelids twitched. This was under the claws of a megalosaurus. This seemingly thin and weak arm only needed to move slightly downwards, and the third prince would lose his life. The third prince was not afraid at all. He still smiled and said, "Brother Long, what's the matter? How much is a lot?" Jilin asked with a smile. His eyes were filled with malice and a faint threat. Bane rolled his eyes and sighed helplessly. "Although I also want you to help the third prince. Can you please be more reserved? Aren't you a high-level life form? Aren't you a proud dragon? What was the meaning of this? Could it be that you're so easily bought over by human money?" However, when the third prince mentioned an extremely exaggerated number, Bane realized that some things were just that easy. "Aya, the third prince, it's such a shame that we didn't meet sooner," Jilin said extremely exaggeratedly. "When I first saw you, I could tell that you were different from other ordinary humans." Bane silently found a stool and sat down. He felt a little dizzy. Just a moment ago, he seemed to see Aisha's shadow on Jilin. "Oh, how different." "Brother Long, please explain in detail." The third prince said, When I first saw you, I could feel the aura of an emperor on you. You should be the emperor of the Middle Empire," Jilin said as he patted the third prince. "Ha ha. How can this little brother take on such a great responsibility?" The third prince said. "Brother Long, you flatter me." No. Jilin also waved his hand. "My dragon race has never lied. Bane wanted to take a sip of tea to calm himself down, but when he heard Jilin's words, he choked on the tea in his mouth. He coughed until his face turned red. He thought to himself, I haven't seen him for a few days. Where did Jilin learn to say such words? Ouyang Ju glanced at Sword Saint, which meant that this was the greatest enemy of humans. Sword Saint nodded first, then shook his head, which meant that he wasn't usually like this. Since that's the case, when the third prince is in trouble, we naturally can't just stand by and watch. Bane, don't you agree? Jilin said. Yes, that's right. Bane nodded. All right, what do you think we should do? Jilin asked. How about I directly charge into the palace and catch your father? Anyway, that formation shouldn't be used yet. Jilin was right. The Great Qiankuan formation couldn't be used now, so what Jilin said was a feasible plan. But the third prince felt that something was wrong. Jilin saw that the third prince's expression was a little strange, so he changed his words. If you feel that this is disrespectful to your father, then we'll make a move on your brothers. They're all in the capital, close by. This was Jilin's initial plan when he first came to the capital. Bane was dumbfounded. He thought to himself, is this still the Jilin I know? Mr. Ouyang once said, money makes the world go round. Bane originally thought that this sentence was a little exaggerated. But looking at it now, the ancients really didn't lie. What do you mean? The third prince asked. Kill them all. That way, you'll definitely be able to ascend the throne. Jilin said. The third prince looked at Jilin without saying a word. He became the emperor to avoid the tragedy of his father and son fighting each other. If he followed Jilin's method, then it would be meaningless. If you have the help of the Red Disaster, even if you ascend the throne, you won't be able to convince the people. Sword Saint said he still insisted that this guy shouldn't be involved in human affairs. It was no different from asking a tiger for its skin. Ouyang Ju smiled. A plan came to his mind and said, then we'll steal it. How did you steal it? Sword Saint asked. Fish in troubled waters. Naturally, no one can see the hands clearly. Ouyang Ju said. Although the pond is big, in the eyes of the emperor, the bottom could be seen clearly. Where did the water come from? Sword Saint asked. When the water is too clear, there are no fish, and when there are fish, there will be muddy water. You mean, in this pond, there are 13 fish. The water can be muddy. Isn't this a bit disrespectful? Sword Saint said mockingly. This old man is already plotting a rebellion. Why would I care if he's disrespectful? Ouyang Ju blew his beard and glared, appearing to be very stubborn. That's reasonable. 13 fish can indeed muddy the water, but the problem is, why should the 13 fish listen to you and muddy the water together? We have the Dragon King here. Why should we be afraid that the fish won't listen to us? You mean? That's right. You can't do this. It's just right for him to do it. It's indeed a bit shameless. Sword Saint and Mr. Ouyang spoke in riddles. The third prince and Xueqing didn't say anything, but Jilin and Bane definitely wouldn't understand. Bane didn't say anything, but Jilin couldn't stand humans putting on airs in front of him, pretending to be profound. Thus, he said, Sword User, Old Man Cup, let me tell you a story. Sword Saint and Mr. Ouyang immediately stopped talking and looked at Jilin. Ouyang Ju thought to himself, what's the reason for this Old Man Cup story? Please go ahead. Ouyang Ju looked at Jilin and said seriously. The rest of the people also looked at Jilin in the same way. After all, how many people were lucky enough to hear the story of the Megalosaurus since ancient times? Once upon a time, a woman fell in love with a man. Ouyang Ju nodded slightly as he listened. He thought to himself, the beginning is so straightforward, so it shouldn't be a story from the Middle Empire. Then, the woman confessed her feelings to the man. Ouyang Ju was sure that this wasn't a story from the Middle Empire. It sounded more like a story from the Sami Empire. Then, the man gave the woman a piece of paper with the word "you" written on it. The woman didn't know what it meant. But when she saw the word "you," she thought it was a tragedy. Why is that? The third prince asked aloud. The woman thought that "you" was an honorific, and honorific often meant distant. Ouyang Ju nodded slightly again. Keeping a respectful distance. That makes sense. So, this matter was left unsettled, and the two sides didn't contact each other again. Until many years later, the man and woman met by chance, and the woman asked about this matter. The woman asked, "What does this word mean?" The man said, "You are my heart." Xueqing's eyes sparkled as she listened, and Ouyang Ju nodded repeatedly. The third prince was already in a trance. Bane was amazed, and felt that the third prince's money was really worth it. Only Sword Saint asked, "What do you mean?" Jilin smiled and said, "This story tells us if you have something to say it directly. Don't talk nonsense, it's useless." Chapter 186. Sword Saint looked at Jilin, not knowing what was going on. Just like how Jilin didn't understand his conversation with Mr. Ouyang. Ever since the Red Disaster appeared, it had brought countless disasters to humanity. He just flew across the sky by accident, and the wind he brought with him could easily overturn the sturdy houses of humans. As for the people in the houses, there was no need to mention it. Because of the Red Disaster's carelessness, humanity suffered heavy losses. Its damage was comparable to an earthquake or natural disaster, and humanity couldn't do anything about it. Therefore, humanity called it the Red Disaster. However, it was this extremely terrifying red calamity that told a group of people in the human capital a love story that sounded like a lame joke that it had heard from somewhere. Sword Saint, and I want all the other princes to rebel on the same day and turn the capital city into a pot of porridge. Then, we will sneak into the palace and ask His Majesty to abdicate. Ouyang Ju said. Jilin nodded slightly, thinking, can't this be explained clearly? Why do we have to beat around the bush? You mean, let all the royal brothers cover for us? The third prince asked. How is that possible? Why not? Ouyang Ju smiled. Is your life more important or the throne more important? You mean threaten them? The third prince asked. That's right. This. Royal brothers, no matter what, they are still royal children. They should still be magnanimous. It might not be that easy. We might as well try this. Brother Long, promise me, don't kill anyone. The third prince said. Okay. Jilin waved his hand perfunctorily. This. Brother Bei, help me keep an eye on him. The third prince pleaded. Okay. Bane also perfunctorily agreed. He thought, how can I stop him? Jade Algae Pavilion. Jade Algae Pavilion was the largest brothel in the capital city. Located in the center of Red Flower Street, the entire building was decorated in gold and jade. Compared to the Spring Breeze house where the third prince stayed all year round, this place was many times more luxurious. The people who came and went were all high-ranking officials and nobles. Even the worst of them were rich merchants with 100,000 strings of coins on their waists. How would those poor scholars, who didn't have a good reputation, dare to look inside? A place like this was a standard money-squandering establishment. The amount of money needed to spend a night here was enough to make any hedonistic son of a wealthy family in the capital suck in a breath of cold air and bite their teeth. But today, the entire top floor of the Jade Algae Pavilion had been reserved by a mysterious guest. The ladies of Jade Algae Pavilion were so shocked that they felt a little uneasy, because it would not only require a lot of money. Jilin and Bane walked on the streets filled with brothels. They walked side by side in the middle of the road, looking down on everyone else. In this place of romance, they walked with an imposing aura, as if they would kill any god or Buddha in their way. However, when Bane passed by Spring Breeze house, he greeted the ladies upstairs with a silly smile, ruining this imposing aura for no reason. Jilin and Bane walked to the door of Jade Algae Pavilion. Before Bane could express his surprise, Jilin had already walked in. Hey, wait for me. Can you tell who is the 10th third prince? You can't even tell if he is a man or a woman just by looking at his face. You face blind. Ben shouted as he hurriedly caught up with him. Then can you tell the difference between each sheep in a flock? Jilin asked. I can't, but can people and sheep be the same? Bane said. In my opinion, people and sheep are the same, Jilin said. Where did this young master come from? You don't look familiar. Greetings to this servant. As soon as Jilin entered, a woman in her 30s, who looked very charming, quickly walked up to him. I'm looking for someone, move aside, Jilin said. This young master is quite impatient. Don't worry, the person you're looking for won't run away. Everyone who comes here is looking for someone. As the woman spoke, She patted Jilin coquettishly. Bane's eyelids twitched when he saw this. Jilin didn't pay any attention to her and walked inside. The woman took a step forward and stood in front of Jilin. Jilin furrowed his brows. Bane felt that something was going to happen, so he quickly whispered in Jilin's ear, "They see that we're wearing ordinary clothes and are afraid that we don't have money, so they want money from us." Jilin's eyes widened, and a golden light slowly rose in his eyes. He looked at Bane and said, "Want money from me?" When the woman heard Jilin say this, she also became anxious. She pointed at Jilin's nose and shouted, "Io! If you don't want money, who do you want money from?" "What? No money. No money to go out. You're just a pauper. Who do you think you are?" "Let me tell you, my jade algae court is not a place where people like you can enter." The woman cursed as soon as she opened her mouth, and her words were extremely unpleasant. It was worthy of being the most expensive brothel in the capital and even the entire continent. Even the person who came to escort them was so arrogant. Bane grabbed Jilin's arm tightly, and Jilin's hand was about to be raised. Ever since Jilin was born, no one had ever pointed at his nose and scolded him. When the woman saw that Bane was still holding Jilin back, she knew that the two of them wouldn't dare to cause trouble. So she looked down on them. "Io, what's the matter? You still want to fight?" The woman sneered and said, "Open your dog eyes and take a good look at where you are. How dare you cause trouble here? If you know what's good for you, leave quickly." The woman's shouting naturally attracted the attention of many people around them. However, no one meddled in other people's business. This kind of thing was very common in this kind of place. Although it was common, there were still many people watching with interest. Some held their wine glasses and pretended to be calm, but their eyes kept glancing over. Some laughed with their companions at Jilin and Bane for overestimating themselves. Some even jeered and said that they should beat them up and throw them out. All of them looked down on them because they had money. They could come in, sit here, and drink, and have a woman carefully accompanying them. Jilin didn't have money, so he couldn't enter and was scolded by the woman. The difference between them was obvious, and a sense of superiority spontaneously arose. In the end, the way humans established their superiority was through looking down on others. Jilin looked back at Bane, pointed his eyes, and asked, "What did she just say about my eyes?" This woman is the same as the sisters in Chunfeng Lu. They all have a hard life. The girls in Chunfeng Lu have the protection of the third prince, but this woman might have a harder life. Those who don't know are not guilty and don't deserve to die. Bane said anxiously. Jilin looked at Bane strangely and said, "I just found out that you are actually a kind person. Just do what you were paid to do. There is no need to complicate things." Bane still didn't answer the question. His words were to save the woman's life. However, the woman didn't seem to appreciate it. Hearing Bane say that she had a hard life, it was as if someone had stepped on her sore spot. She said in a stern voice, "Who do you think you are?" "I tell you, Schwa." Following the sound of a sword being unsheathed, a white light flashed, and a steel sword was steadily placed an inch in front of the woman's snow-white neck. The woman suddenly couldn't say anything. She didn't expect that someone would dare to use force here. Bane held the steel sword firmly, ensuring that he could scare the woman into silence without hurting her. He didn't want to do this, but he knew that if he allowed the woman to continue, she wouldn't be able to speak anymore. Therefore, he had to make the first move before Jilin. "Who is it? Put down the sword. Otherwise, you won't be able to leave this jade algae court." The moment Bane pulled out the sword, the thugs who had been watching this place for a long time rushed out from all directions and surrounded Jilin and Bane. There were more people around, and they seemed to be more interested. Each one of them looked excited and almost clapped their hands and cheered. The woman saw that her thugs had come out and felt a little more confident. She opened her mouth and said, "Two blind things. You give me the sword now." Plop! Before the woman finished speaking, Bane's sword had already left her neck. Then there was the sound of a human body crashing into a table, followed by the sound of bowls and plates on the table shattering. Of course, the sword leaving the neck wasn't because Bane was afraid. Now that Jilin was behind him, he had nothing to fear. It was because Jilin gently pushed him from behind. Bane was immediately sent flying, crashing into two tables in a row. Soup splattered everywhere, and it was a mess. The woman was a little confused, but she still said to Jilin, "At least you have." The woman suddenly couldn't continue speaking because Jilin's hand was on her head. His movements were very light and gentle. It was like a man in love, gently caressing his girlfriend's hair. Countless years later, perhaps humans would call this behavior head-touching. But for some reason, even though Jilin's movements were very gentle, the woman felt that she couldn't speak. Bane struggled to sit up from the mess and shouted at Jilin, "Jilin, wait a minute. You don't have to. You don't deserve to die." But Jilin also felt that Bane's words made sense. He actually hesitated for a moment. "She's really annoying." After Jilin finished speaking, he gently plucked the woman's head from her body. His movements were still very light and gentle, as if he was picking up an apple from a plate. In an instant, blood gushed out like a fountain. It shocked everyone. Murder! Murder! The people who were just watching the show no longer had their calmness. They all shouted as they rushed out. The crowd rushed out like a tide, and the scene became extremely chaotic. Even hired thugs were horrified and ran away. After watching over people's territories for so many years, they could tell who they could afford to offend and who they couldn't. To be able to pull off a head so casually, how terrifying was that person's strength? Bane looked at the headless woman who was still standing there and didn't know what to say. He could only sigh loudly. "I told you to stop talking, but you just had to. Why is it so hard to save your life?" Jilin held the head that was still dripping with blood and walked to Bane. He extended a hand to Bane and said with a smile, "Get up." Bane looked at Jilin and felt that Jilin's smile was exactly the same as the smile he had when he stabbed the Golden King. The sunlight was at its peak, the warmth was at its peak, and the warmth was at its peak. Also, it was at its peak. Please add it to your collection. Please recommend it. Thank you. Chapter 187. The 10th Third Prince of the Middle Empire, Li Wen. He was currently sitting on the highest floor of the Jade Algae Court, hosting a banquet. The 10th Third Prince, who guarded a trade route all year round, was probably the richest among all the princes. He had more than 4 or 5 businesses under his control. There were 6 big tables full of guests. They were all under the 10th Third Prince's control. Among them were the shopkeepers and workers who had followed the 10th Third Prince for a long time. There were also high-ranking officials who had been bribed by the 10th Third Prince after he returned to the capital. "Come, everyone, drink this cup with me." Li Wen shouted loudly, seeming to be in high spirits. "Cheers! Let's drink." Everyone naturally followed suit and raised their cups. After everyone finished drinking, Li Wen said, "Everyone, do you know why we are gathered in the Jade Algae Court today? Do you know why I am so happy?" Everyone present was smart. Just by looking at the 10th Third Prince's state, they could already guess what was going on. At a time like this, there are only a few things that could make the 13th Prince so happy. "But I don't know. Everyone said one after another. Without exception, Li Wen saw that his subordinates were so obedient and couldn't help but be happier. He said, "I might as well say it directly. The reason I am so happy today is because of my 2 royal brothers, the 11th royal brother and the 3rd royal brother. Those 2 have no chance at all. Ha ha." The 10th Third Prince laughed and shook his head as if the 2 enemies who had killed his father had just died. Needless to say, the 11th royal brother, the 3rd Prince, is still doing well. "Why do you say that, 13th Prince?" a rather young man asked in bewilderment. "Ha ha." Li Wen laughed even more happily. He thought to himself that this person was really smart. He could help him in the future. "I don't know if everyone knows that just half a month ago, a thief dared to stab my father," the 10th Third Prince said. The young man thought to himself, who doesn't know? This is a serious crime that can implicate 9 generations of the family. Who is it? Is His Majesty all right? The rest of the people exclaimed in surprise, as if this was the first time they had heard of it. When a young man saw this, he was secretly speechless and sighed at his own inexperience. "His Majesty is fine." The 13th Prince dragged out his words and said calmly, "But everyone, do you know where that scoundrel has gone?" I don't know. Everyone still shook their heads cooperatively. "He was actually taken in by my 3rd brother." "Haha, everyone, what do you think? Is there a bird that stands out more than this?" The third prince swayed back and forth, and tears began to flow from his eyes. It was as if he was mocking the third prince's stupidity. When everyone saw him laughing like this, they couldn't help but laugh as well. Only the young man did not smile, so he was very conspicuous. "What's your name?" The third prince pointed at him and asked. The young man stood up and replied, "Replying to your highness, I am Wongli. I just passed the imperial exam 2 years ago. Young and talented, young and promising. You flatter me, your highness. I saw everyone laughing just now. Why didn't you laugh?" Replying to your highness, I really can't laugh. "Oh? Why?" Even though the 11th prince and the third prince have been defeated, there are still more than 10 princes eyeing them covetously. I really don't understand what's so funny. Wong Li, sit down. Li Wen walked to Wong Li's side and patted his shoulder lightly. "You said it very well. That's why I asked all of you to come here today. Does that mean, your highness, you're going to make a move?" Wong Li stood up and said anxiously, "You can't do that. Your highness, please reconsider. Right now, it's far from us making a move. How can I not understand this?" The third prince confidently interrupted Wong Li. "Do you know why the 11th prince and the 16th prince rebelled so hastily?" I don't know," Wong Li said. "I did it, you. How is that possible? How is that not possible? Money makes the world go round. Don't tell me you haven't heard of this saying before. Your highness, did you bribe the subordinates of the 11th prince and the 16th prince?" Haha, it's funny that they kept it in the dark. Then, just as Wong Li was about to say something about blood, a commotion suddenly came from below. The third prince immediately stopped talking and gave a look to a man who had been invisible the whole time. The man in black nodded and walked out of the room. "That's the great guardian of the King Kong sect? Sun Yuan?" "I think so. I didn't think that even this person would be taken in by the 13th prince. He must have paid a heavy price." Of course, the appearance of the man in black caused everyone to whisper to each other. On the other hand, the 13th prince smirked proudly. After a while, the commotion gradually disappeared, and Sun Yuan walked in with a solemn expression. He walked to the third prince's side and said, "Someone killed someone down there." The third prince looked at Sun Yuan strangely. "What's so surprising about killing someone? You killed a lot of people too." Sun Yuan saw that the third prince didn't care. So he added, "The other people in the building all ran away. It seems like they came for us." The third prince froze and frowned. Just as he was wondering who would be so reckless, the sound of quarreling suddenly came from outside. "Do you have to kill her? She scolded you. Her attitude was a bit bad. But you didn't have to do this. She died without a complete corpse. She's already dead. So what's the point of having a complete corpse? Is it useful?" "It's useless. But in the eyes of humans, it's very important. When humans kill other creatures, do they leave them with a complete corpse? For example, chickens, fish, pigs, that's different. Arrogant humans, don't be unreasonable. She didn't have to die. Who asked her to say that I have dog eyes? When have I ever been humiliated like this? Look at my eyes. Do they look like dog eyes? Darken your eyes. They're dazzling. I can't darken them." She was just saying, she didn't really say that your eyes are dog eyes. Look at me. She also said that I have dog eyes. Am I angry? Of course you're not angry. Saying that you have dog eyes is a compliment to you. Are human eyes better than dog eyes? What do you want to do? Nothing. That. Why are you carrying it all the time? Hurry up and deal with it. It's weird. It'll be useful later. Can you recognize the right person? I'll let you see later. Okay. Tell me the truth. Did you kill her because she wanted money from you? No. Liar. I never. Usually don't lie. The quarreling outside the door gradually stopped. The third prince and everyone else stared at the door. Pah! A sound was heard. The door was violently pushed open and the door bolt, which was as thick as a person's arm, was directly broken into two. A seemingly harmless young man walked in. If he wasn't carrying a head that was still dripping with blood, then a young man carrying a long sword followed in. The third prince glanced at Sun Yuan. Sun Yuan nodded and wanted to go up and ask about the other party's background. Who is the one? Ji Lin asked loudly. Baines secretly nodded. So that's how they found him. A burst of exclamations sounded in the room. Everyone was shocked. Who is this person? Who dares to directly call the imperial prince by his name? The third prince ignored Jilin. Instead, he walked back to his seat and poured himself a glass of wine. In his eyes, Jilin was already a dead man. What was there to talk about with a dead man, sir? Knocking on the door with a head, isn't that a bit rude? Sun Yuan said in a low voice. Are you Li Wen? Jilin asked. I'm not. Then get out of the way. It's none of your business. Forgive me for not being able to comply. Is the 13th prince someone that just anyone can meet? Why? I'm Sun Yuan, the great guardian of the King Kong sect. If you want to meet the 13th prince, you'll have to go through me first. Jilin raised an eyebrow and glanced at Bane. What's the King Kong sect? Have you heard of it? Bane shook his head blankly. Although the Sword Saint had told him a few interesting stories, he had never heard of the King Kong sect. How do I go through you? Bane looked at Sun Yuan and asked. In his heart, he was telling himself not to fight if he could, but it was obvious that this was not possible. Sun Yuan grinned and tore off his clothes, revealing his muscular upper body and bronze-colored skin. Sun Yuan assumed a very mysterious posture, and the shadow of a golden Vajra appeared behind him. She did the same thing as him, covering him up. This is King Kong Phantom? This is the phenomenon of the King Kong formula reaching the 9th level. Sun Yuan is indeed the #1 genius of the King Kong sect in 100 years. As long as the Sword Mountain disciples don't show up, the golden light won't be broken. Now there's nothing to worry about. What's the meaning of this? Jilin blinked and asked. The human in front of him was standing still, as if he was waiting to be beaten up. I'll give you 3 moves, Sun Yuan said heroically. After 3 moves, I hope you'll back off. Jilin was truly dumbfounded as he narrowed his eyes. Bane rubbed his brows hard. Where did this big brother come from? What was he trying to do? The rest of the people cheered and praised Sun Yuan for having the demeanor of the King Kong sect's great guardian. It was a tradition of the King Kong sect to give the opponent 3 moves before fighting. Jilin nodded and threw out a punch. Boom! There was a loud noise. Then the earth quaked and the mountains shook. Everyone instinctively covered their heads and faces and closed their eyes. How could they see what was happening when everything calmed down and the dust settled? They looked around. Then there was dead silence. There was no trace of Sun Yuan in the room. There was only a new hole in the wall that was the size of a person. There was also blood splattered everywhere. I'll ask again. Who's Li Wen? Jilin asked again with a smile. The 13th prince slowly raised his hand and said softly, his neck shrinking slightly. Chapter 188. Although no one had seen what happened, the miserable state of the room clearly told them that Sun Yuan's fate was even worse than this room's. Also, this young man must be a peerless monster. Speaking of which, the fact that the third prince dared to raise his hand and reveal his identity in such a situation made everyone admire him. After all, the pride of a member of the royal family was still there. Oh, you're Li Wen? Jilin found a chair that faced the third prince and sat down. He gently placed the head in his hand on the table, making a soft thud. This soft thud seemed to make everyone's heart skip a beat. Yes, you are? Although the third prince was afraid, he did not stand up and run, nor did he yell for people to come and protect him. This was because he knew that if Sun Yuan, who was known to have an indestructible golden body, had been defeated so easily, then it would be a waste of effort even if everyone came together. As for running, the third prince did not have the confidence to escape from such a strong person. Therefore, he was now at the mercy of others, and he could only listen to whatever they said. A real man should not only stand tall, but he should also be able to back down. You don't need to know who I am, Jilin said coolly. You just need to know that the third prince asked me to come and find you. Third brother. The third prince pondered. Then the person behind you is the hero who stabbed my father? When the third prince mentioned this, Bane coughed softly and turned his head away. He had hurt the other party's father, and now that he was being questioned by the other party's son, no matter who it was, they would feel embarrassed. It seems so. The third prince said, You dare to stab His Majesty the Emperor and still dare to swagger through the streets. You are indeed brave. Dong dong. Jilin knocked twice on the table with his index finger, Third brother, why did you ask me to come and find you? Why did you make such a big fuss and trouble someone like you to come and find me personally? The third prince said. Jilin thought for a moment but did not say anything. When Bane saw this, he understood that he had forgotten. He quickly took out a piece of paper and handed it to Jilin. Jilin took the paper and handed it to the third prince without even looking at it. The third prince stood up and took it with both hands. With just one glance, the 13th prince's expression became extremely unsightly. Third brother, doesn't he think he's going too far? The third prince gritted his teeth. Jilin nodded without denying it. What if I don't agree? The 13th prince said hatefully. Jilin put his hand on her head and gently stroked her beautiful hair. The meaning of the threat was very clear and self-evident. Seeing this, Bane felt disgusted. So this was how to use it. The third prince's chest rose and fell violently, as if he would pounce on Jilin with bloodshot eyes in the next moment. Oh no, there was no possibility of him fighting with Jilin. After a while, the third prince let out a long sigh of relief, and then slumped into his chair, as if his spirit had left him with that sigh. Third brother, are you only looking for me? The third prince asked. You're the first, there are 12 more, Jilin said. The 13th prince immediately felt much more relaxed. I don't accept this, the third prince said. It's fine, Jilin said. Who exactly are you? Hee. Seeing that Jilin and Bane had both left, Wang Li mustered up his courage and walked to the third prince's side. Your Highness, what was written on that paper? Wang Li asked. The third prince drank a cup of wine and casually handed the paper in his hand to Wang Li. Wang Li took the paper, and the third prince clutched it so tightly that it could not be seen clearly. Wang Li frowned, squinted his eyes, and strenuously tried to decipher the words on the paper. 3 days later, at midnight, attack. The Ministry of Revenue's Yamen. Directly attack the National Treasury? What? Their intentions are to be executed. How is this possible? After Wang Li finished reading, the room was filled with cries of surprise. This, Your Highness, with just a few of us. The third prince raised his hand slightly, indicating for everyone not to panic. Your Highness, we can't do this. This is suicide. Wang Li said anxiously. The National Treasury is the lifeline of the empire. With the few people we have, it's no different from an ant trying to shake a tree. Then what do you think we should do? The third prince looked at Wang Li from the corner of his eyes. Wang Li did not say anything. That's true, they really had no choice now. Also, from the looks of it, third brother doesn't really want us to attack the National Treasury. The third prince said thoughtfully. He knows that we can't attack it either. He wants to muddy the waters. He wants to fish in troubled waters. Then, Your Highness, why don't we really attack the National Treasury and steal the money? This way, no matter which prince ascends the throne in the end, without money, he can only watch helplessly. At that time, you might have a chance. A chubby rich merchant stood up and said loudly, looking unusually excited, Hee. The third prince could not help but laugh. He looked at his subordinate and asked, Do you know how many soldiers are guarding the National Treasury now? That person shook his head blankly. 564. The third prince said straightforwardly without hesitation. It seemed that he had been thinking about the National Treasury for a long time. 500. That rich merchant thought for a while. So little, 500 soldiers guarding the National Treasury. According to the legends of the Middle Empire's National Treasury, that was equivalent to 500 people guarding 10 mountains of gold. How could that be possible? Do you know why it's so little? The third prince asked. I don't know. The rich merchant shook his head again. Because there's no need to look at the National Treasury. There's no King money there. Just these 500 people, and they're just for show. The third prince said angrily. He pulled the rich merchant in front of him and shouted, Do you know? If I give you the National Treasury now, you'll have to pay for it yourself. The third prince felt a lot better after shouting. He pushed the rich merchant away and looked at the big hole in the wall and muttered to himself. Third imperial brother, you've planned it all out, ah? Ruthless enough, you can. This night in the capital was destined to be an extraordinary night. It was destined to not be recorded in the history books, but it might be recorded in the third prince's personal history book, that unique history book that recorded the rebellion of the Leaf family's princes. That history book might record it like this. The 34th generation of the Leaf family, the third Prince Liu, on the night of the 20th day of the 8th lunar month, year 202 of the Guangming calendar, received the help of a true dragon from the heavens and suppressed all the princes. The dragons bowed their heads, and the hegemony was achieved. Here, thank you for your recommendation votes and subscriptions. Thank you for your affirmation. Many thanks. Chapter 189. There was no such thing as hard-working people in this world. There were only those who were forced by life or those who were willing to fight for their ideals. Or, to put it another way, it was all for the sake of eating. Everyone had to eat. If they didn't eat, they would die. This was a useless sentence that couldn't be any more useless. It didn't matter if you were an emperor or a commoner, an adventurer who just left the beginner's village, or a legend who dominated the world. Everyone had to eat. Therefore, eating was the most important thing for all living things. However, humans were awkward and contradictory creatures that liked to do things that put the cart before the horse. Some people said that people worked to eat, but sometimes they didn't even eat because of work. This was a very strange thing. For example, the third prince. The third prince held a pair of chopsticks in his hand and kept moving. From time to time, he would play a lot of tricks, but he turned a blind eye to the delicious food on the table in front of him. What he knew was that the third prince had something on his mind and was not in the mood to eat. Those who didn't know would think that the third prince had read a famous novel and was practicing the left and right inter-fighting martial arts described in the novel. The sword saint glanced at the third young master and said, "What's there to worry about when it's a sure thing? Keep calm." "Uncle, I'm worried that if my brothers would rather die than submit." "Do you think Brother Long will hold back?" Sword Saint thought seriously and said, "That's definitely not possible. What if? I'm saying what if? What if Brother Long kills them all? Then the history books, then what the history book gonna write? Won't you have the final say?" This is a little too shameless. Those who achieve great things don't care about trifles. But this is not a trifling matter. Compared to such a huge empire, this is a trifling matter. Killing your brother, forcing your father. How can you be human? How will the history books record it? How will the future generations talk about it? The Emperor of the 1,000 ages, decisive in killing, far surpassing our ancestors. Since ancient times, there has never been such a person. Uncle, stirring up right and wrong, inverting right and wrong. How could that be the conduct of a gentleman? I disdain it. Gentleman? A gentleman can be bullied by other means. This is a fallacy. This is the custom of your Leaf family. Eat. A total of 13 princes of the Middle Empire had returned to the capital. Although they were all half-brothers, the royal family of the Middle Empire never had the habit of living together as a family. Perhaps he was afraid that if they got along too well, he wouldn't be able to do it in the future. Or perhaps it was too dangerous. Therefore, the 13 princes formed a fan shape around the palace with great tacit understanding, evenly distributed all over the capital. Not only could they maintain the distance between each other, but they could also ensure that the distance to the palace was the same. No one would be able to gain an advantage, nor would they be at a disadvantage. Because of this, in order to find the 13 princes, Jilin and Bane practically walked an arc through the entire capital, which was known for its magnificence and magnificence. Jilin was fine, but Bane was truly exhausted. Jilin only pushed open the door to the ordinary courtyard after the moon had traveled for most of the day. Although it was already late at night, the third prince was still sitting alone at the table, staring blankly at the door. With a creak, the door to the courtyard was suddenly pushed open. The third prince jumped up, his face full of excitement. The first thing he saw was Jilin's somewhat ordinary face, but before he could smile, he saw the 3 heads in Jilin's hands. The third prince rushed forward, his hands trembling as he held up a head. He brushed aside the hair that had become sticky due to the blood on the head. The corners of his mouth trembled, and hot tears filled his eyes. Just as he was about to cry out, "Brother," he suddenly froze. Because the third prince suddenly realized that he did not know this person. Although the third prince left home when he was young, he still recognized all of his brothers. It was mainly because Zhao Qi always collected information on the other princes and then forced him to read it, saying something like, "Know thyself and know thy enemy, and you will never be defeated." Brother Long, this is? The third prince immediately withdrew his hands and even wiped them in disgust. Jilin had obviously forgotten and turned to look at Bane. Bane snorted angrily. Jilin blinked and said to the third prince, "I forgot. I forgot." The third prince nodded slightly. "Then may I ask, Brother Long, how did these 3 people die at the hands of Brother Long? And these 2 are—" "Not important," Jilin said. "What's not important?" Bane could no longer stay silent and shouted loudly. He woke up a few of the neighbors' dogs that were sleeping soundly. The first is a girl from Tamamo Court. The second is a general under Luo Fenghu. The third is a civil official under the 5th prince. Luo Fenghu's general. The third prince exclaimed, "Southern Marshal Luo Fenghu? Brother Bei, how did you know?" "This person reported his family name before he died, so it shouldn't be wrong." Where was he killed?" "At the eldest prince's place." "Big brother, that, dare I ask, Brother Long, are my brothers and the others safe and sound?" Jilin paused for a moment and pretended to be nonchalant as he said, "Most of them are fine." The third prince also froze and asked with a dry laugh, "What do you mean by most of them?" "It means that most of your brothers are easy to talk to. But there are 3 who, in the words of you humans, are especially stubborn. They really couldn't be persuaded. So in the end, I broke one of their arms. That's fine too. Thank you, Brother Long, for showing mercy." The third prince cupped his hands to express his gratitude. He was originally very shocked, but on second thought, this was the work of Red Disaster, and only 3 arms were broken out of more than a dozen people. There was really nothing much to say. The only doubt in his heart now was which of his brothers was so stubborn. Jilin said it casually, but Bane couldn't help but twitch his mouth, thinking, "Yes, it's only 3 arms. Then why don't you talk about those innocent people lying on the ground before you broke the prince's arm?" "So they all agreed?" the third prince asked. "Of course," Jilin said. "Thank you, Brother Long, Brother Bei. I will never forget such a great kindness." The third prince said seriously with a bow, "We're all friends, don't worry about it." Bane grinned and said generously, "How is it hard when you're paid to do things?" Jilin said very politely. The third prince naturally understood the meaning of his words. He immediately patted his chest and promised, "Brother Long, don't worry. After it's done, there will be no mistakes." "That's good. I'm in a hurry now, so you have to hurry," Jilin said. 3 days. After 3 days, whether we win or lose, everything will be settled," the third prince said as he stretched out 3 fingers. "If it goes well, you'll be the emperor of the Middle Empire?" "Yes." "Is the title of emperor so important and special in the eyes of humans?" "Yes." "Compared to it, it's as if blood relatives are not worth mentioning. But it seems like you don't think so, Brother Long. What can you do after you become emperor?" "I could do anything, but I can't do anything." "What's the point of that?" "Everyone only has one life, and it's very short. Everyone should live according to their own wishes, but you can't live for yourself anymore." "Isn't that a loss?" "A little." "Then are you willing to stop now?" "The arrow on the bow has to be shot." "That's an excuse. You just want to be emperor." Maybe. Who dares to say that they don't want to be emperor at all?" "After you become emperor, can you still go to the Lee Key umbrella shop?" "Probably not." "Can you still go to the Spring Breeze restaurant to drink?" "Probably not." "Can you still interact with the so-called heroes of the martial world?" "Probably not." "Can you still recite poems when you see a beautiful woman?" "When you see a beauty, you can't forget her. When you don't see her for a day, you go crazy thinking about her." "How do you know?" "We didn't go far that day, and my ears are very good." "What do you mean?" Bane asked. "You drank too much that day, so you don't know," Jilin said. The third prince chuckled. "I can't. If I casually recite this poem, it'll cause a big problem." "Why bother, Brother Long? You don't understand. Can I marry Miss Xueqing?" "Yes." "Then it's not too bad." "Huh. Brother Long is right. Brother Long, tell me, did I do the right thing?" "I don't know." Human affairs are always very complicated, and complicated things are very meaningless. But know a human saying that is very good. What human saying can make you think it's good? Let me hear it. Whether it's merits or demerits, the future generations will judge. That's true. Chapter 190. Alcohol was the drink that humans drank the most, apart from water. Moreover, in the history books of mankind, there were also several strokes that were heavily colored. They did not lose out to any historical figures in the legends of history. The great ancestor killed the white snake while drunk. Feast of hangmen. Discussing heroes while boiling wine. Going into battle alone. Dispelling military power with a cup of wine. Ever since this thing was born by coincidence, it had driven countless people crazy. There were even people who could not live without 3 meals a day. No matter what they did, they had to get 2 mouthfuls of it. As the saying goes, a pot of turbid wine is a joyous meeting. Since ancient times, there have been so many things that were laughed about. The third prince had lived in chunfeng restaurants since he was a child. If he said that he did not know how to drink, no one in the capital would believe it. Not only did the third prince know how to drink, he loved to drink and could drink. After the big matter was said, everything was settled. It had already reached the point where it was useless to think about anything else. The arrow had already left the bow. Everything depended on the heavens. All the methods that could be used had already been used. All the scenarios that could be imagined had already been considered. If he still lost like this, then it would not be an injustice. The third prince felt that when the time came, he should not be unresigned. At most, he would put on an act in front of others and look up to the heavens and sigh, "Man proposes, God disposes." Since that was the case, there was nothing else to do. He would just drink. Anyway, Shueqing did not take the table with her when she left. Thus, the third prince pulled Jilin and Bane to drink together. Bane was still as useless. Although he had stayed in the Middle Empire for a while, his alcohol tolerance did not increase at all. After drinking 2 cups, he knocked his head on the table and lost consciousness. The third prince stood up and called him twice, but he did not wake him up. The third prince pointed at him and laughed. Then, only the third prince and Jilin were left at the table. In fact, the third prince was not very willing to drink with Jilin, because he knew that Jilin could not get drunk no matter how much he drank. The scene of Jilin drinking his way through the red light district 3 times until dawn was still vivid in his mind. But today, the third prince's mood was obviously a little depressed. When a person was depressed, it was inevitable that they would drink a few more cups. Once a person drank a lot of alcohol, it would give them an unreasonable sense of self-confidence. In layman's terms, he was carried away. After third young master drank a jar of aged wine, he felt that he could compete with Qi Lin in drinking. After drinking 2 jars of aged wine, he felt that he might be able to win. After drinking 3 jars of wine, he felt that the red disaster was actually nothing much, because at this moment, he didn't have any basic ability to judge Brother Long. Burp, the third prince stood up unsteadily. He held on to Jilin's shoulder and burped loudly. His face was as red as Jilin's original body. For the first time in his life, Jilin felt a little scared. He was afraid that if the third prince vomited all over him, he wouldn't be able to control himself. At that time, he wouldn't be able to get the money. Brother Long, have you really killed a lot of people? Yes. Why? Some were accidents, some. Brother Long, do you know? I don't want to be the emperor at all. It's all because of you. Because of me? When the third prince interrupted Jilin for the first time, Jilin understood that the third prince might not be able to hear him at this time. So he decided that no matter what this human said later, he would ignore it. But he didn't expect that the second sentence would mention him. It's not because of you. The third prince rested his chin on Jilin's arm. Otherwise, he would have collapsed on the ground. The elegant and graceful the third prince, who was like the moonlight, lost his composure for the first time. One could imagine how much pressure he was under. His tears and snot flowed down. His face was a mess, and his body was like a pile of mud. But he wasn't crying. I was living a good life. First, I ran away from my marriage. After betraying my family, I settled down in the red light district, relying on my identity as the prince of the empire, relying on the fact that I was Mr. Ouyang's student, relying on the fact that I was Sword Saint's nephew, living an unbridled and carefree life. Jilin grabbed a mouthful of food and stuffed it into his mouth. He thought to himself, is this how you use the word settle down? I learned it from Staya. Don't think that I don't know anything. He couldn't get enough of the delicious food made by humans. Originally, I could have lived my life without any worries or worries. With a group of heroes following behind me, strolling on the streets, sometimes when the tide came, maybe I could do something interesting like bullying people. Hee hee. The third young master chuckled after he finished speaking. It was as if he had already finished his tyrannical act in his mind. Even Jilin couldn't help but look at him with disdain. He thought to himself, if Staya was here, she might say that letting the third prince become the emperor was a little too hasty, although the brothers in the future might not like me and bully me. But I'm not afraid. My uncle is Sword Saint. How can a legendary figure die after me? If my uncle doesn't die, who dares to touch me? The third prince was already lying on Jilin's lap. Even so, he still raised his arm and spoke while knocking on the table with force, making the table creak. It was so loud that Bane's head moved a little. Jilin glanced at the third prince and thought to himself, this person is indeed extraordinary. Relying on the support of parents and elders is not something to be proud of in the eyes of other humans. Someone like the third prince, who is not ashamed of it at all and is instead self-righteous, is really rare. But suddenly, one day, someone told me that you had appeared out of nowhere. My uncle, who has always been watching my house, especially went out of the country for you. Do you know? From what I remember, I've never seen my uncle leave the Middle Empire. He seemed to be guarding there all the time. As long as my father left the palace, he would stab him with a sword. But that time he went out. When he came back, his sword was broken. Brother Long, that Sword Saint. His sword was broken. Can you believe it? Anyway, I don't dare to believe it. Jilin thought to himself. I believe it. Why wouldn't I believe it? Who told him to cut off my arm? The Sword Saint's sword was broken, and the whole country was in an uproar. Then, someone told me to take over the throne. He said that the Middle Empire can't be in chaos now. Let me be the emperor. Ha ha. Because it's the easiest for me to be the emperor, and there won't be any accidents. What nonsense. Damn it. Why can't the Middle Empire be in chaos? The Middle Empire is in chaos once every few decades. Why has there been no chaos when the throne has changed? It's already a pattern, but now you're telling me not to be in chaos. It's all because of you, Brother Long. Why do you have to be the enemy of humans? Can't you go sleep? In those legends, don't you dragons like to sleep? Go sleep. I promise, from now on, no one will disturb you. Jilin glanced at the sky and asked softly, the third prince, have you seen the stars before? Ha ha, Brother Long, are you drunk? Who hasn't seen the stars before? Do you even need to ask? Have you seen a lot? Not a lot. The third prince's voice was muffled as he shook his head. Why not a lot? The third prince's eyes were blurred, and he didn't speak. It wasn't clear if he couldn't answer, or if he just couldn't react. Obviously, Jilin wasn't looking forward to a normal conversation with questions and answers. Seeing that the third prince didn't speak, he continued, it's because you can't see clearly, but I can see clearly. The clear and bright starry sky, even in my eyes, is the most magnificent scene. Those stars look so small, but in fact, they're the world's biggest miracle. There are countless such miracles. They're just hanging above our heads. Under the starry sky, even I often feel that I'm small. Such a miracle should be visible as soon as I look up, and any animal should be able to see it. However, the humans arrogantly covered her up. The third prince looked up at Jilin. The third prince, do you see how prosperous the capital is? The capital is the most prosperous city in the world. It's our pride. How prosperous? There are many people, countless of them. It's brightly lit as if it's daytime. Yes, it's brightly lit as if it's daytime. Humans have lit up the earth, but covered the starry sky. Do you think it's worth it? Humans are too arrogant, using their insignificant lives to wantonly change the world. It's as if the world is their private property. They're even more arrogant than me. They're also arrogant. So I don't like it. Don't like it. What do you want? I want to wipe out half of the humans in this world, and then divide the world into two halves, half for humans and half for other creatures. Huh. Brother Long is generous. There are quite a lot of humans. You're taking advantage of them. The third prince gave a thumbs up and said exaggeratedly, distribution according to needs. Humans do have a lot of people. You can't do this. Why? Because no one will let you do it. I will also stop you. Brother Long, don't underestimate humans. We are very powerful. You can try. I'm willing to give you this opportunity. Brother Long, you're drunk. Go to sleep. You're the one who's drunk. Yes, I am drunk. I have to sleep. Chapter 191. The third prince had a drinking contest with the megalosaurus in his depression, creating an unprecedented feat in human history. Although he lost in the end, the third prince still displayed the backbone and dignity of a human to the fullest. However, the price he paid for this was, the third prince was unconscious for 2 whole days. When he woke up again, it was already the day before the rebellion. The third prince groggily got up from the bed, only to feel a splitting headache. He struggled to get up to look for water to drink. The third prince looked around, but did not find any water. Then he staggered out of the room. When the third prince pushed open the door, a strong ray of sunlight suddenly shone on the third prince's face. Third young master let out a miserable howl and hurriedly retreated into the shadows. Right now, he was just like a vampire. The third prince, you're awake? Zhao Qi sat on a stone block outside the door, looking at the battered and exhausted the third prince, and said with a smile, Zhao Qi, how many days have I slept? The third prince held his head and said painfully, 2 days, you slept like the dead. Don't you know how to talk? Why didn't you wake me up? Master said not to wake you up. How are the preparations? The third prince, just relax. Well, it turns out that no one needs me. That doesn't mean that the third prince is not important. Then I don't care. I'll take another nap. The third prince, please. Bam! The third prince slammed the door shut. Zhao Qi shook his head and sat down on the stone block. What he said just now was not wrong. The third prince was so important that someone had to watch over him at all times. Now that he was willing to obediently sleep in the house, it was not bad. But not long after, the third prince quietly opened the door again and stuck his head out. Zhao Qi's heart tightened. He turned around and asked, the third prince, what's wrong with you? Brother Qi, can I trouble you to get me some water? I'm so thirsty, wait. In the main hall of the courtyard, there were 3 or 4 people gathered around, pointing at a map. That was the defense map of the capital city. Sword Saint had been working with Ouyang Ju for 2 days to ensure that every step of the plan was foolproof and that every accident had been considered. If there are no accidents, that should be it. Ouyang Ju, whose hair and beard had already turned white, picked up the teacup and took a sip, announcing that this matter had come to an end. Mr. Ouyang, have you made up your mind? Sword Saint asked after a moment of silence. What have you decided? Ouyang Ju glanced at Sword Saint from the corner of his eyes. He had never liked the strongest person in the empire who had killed many of his students. Although we have made full preparations, but from Li Zhang's previous thoughts, we still do not have the upper hand. There is still a great risk. Haha, Sword Saint, who once defeated 1,000,000 soldiers with 1 sword. Why are you still encouraging others? Why are you being so timid? Is it because you are old? How could there be 1,000,000 soldiers? That's because you scholars like to exaggerate things. Besides, if we're talking about age, how can I be compared to you? Then what do you mean, Sword Saint? The history books are written by the victors. This is the tradition of the Middle Empire, and it is also a matter of course. This old man does not think so. If we lose this time, then dare I ask Mr. Ouyang, how will the history books describe you and me? The history books are sacred. How can they be described as descriptions? But they will probably write me as a traitor. Mr. Ouyang, are you sure you want to use the ancient world token as the wager? After Ouyang Ju heard this, he laughed heartily. He stroked his beard and said, this old man is already very old. I'm no longer an impulsive young man. Since I dared enter the arena, I've naturally thought it through thoroughly. Mr. Ouyang is indifferent to fame and fortune. You are indeed a great scholar. You are indeed worthy of being the leader of the literary world. Sword Saint bowed to Ouyang Ju seriously. Sword Saint had not bowed to anyone for many years. Ha ha. Ouyang Ju laughed happily. This old man is not someone who is indifferent to fame and fortune. Scholars like us study hard for our entire lives, restraining ourselves and guarding our hearts. Sometimes we even have to risk our lives and risk our lives to remonstrate. Isn't it all for the sake of leaving our name in history? Sword Saint's bowed body suddenly stiffened. He felt that he could not continue this conversation. But Ouyang Ju was so old, he could not possibly ask him to return the bow. Since Mr. Ouyang has the same name, why do you want to participate? You know, no matter who becomes the emperor, they will all respect you. That is naturally because I have absolute confidence in winning. I did not expect Mr. Ouyang to have the frivolity of a scholar in his bones at such an old age. These words, even I do not dare to say, do you think this old man has lived for so many years in vain? Is the title of an elder of 3 dynasties for nothing? I have personally witnessed the change of the emperor twice. It is time to watch. I do not know what method Lord Ouyang has to dare to say that he will win. When the time comes, you will know. You are still keeping me in suspense? The problem of a scholar is not just adding oil and vinegar. Imperial Palace. Your Majesty, all the princes in the capital have made their moves. It seems that it is about to begin. Western Marshal Qianlan, who is in charge of the defense of the capital, stood in front of the emperor's desk and said softly. The Golden King buried his head in the small mountain of documents and did not even raise his head. He only said in an indifferent voice, I am not surprised that they have made their moves, but the problem is, why are they so united? It is as if they have made an appointment. Could it be that the times have changed? Now, even things like usurping the throne can be a win-win situation. Qianlan did not say anything, because it was not easy to say. No matter how those princes wanted to play, no matter how big the game was, even if they turned the capital upside down, it was still the imperial family's business. How could an outsider interfere? This was also the reason why the Golden King could not raise his head until now. Because those who rebelled all had the surname Li. How is the response? The Golden King suddenly asked. It seemed that the Golden King was not ready to give up the throne just because the other party was his son. Your Majesty, it is basically ready. His Highness brought 2,000 soldiers of the Southern Army and stationed them in the warden's office. I have stationed 8,000 soldiers in the capital. If His Highness makes any moves, they will immediately suppress him. Second Prince does not have any elite soldiers, but he is close to many important officials in the court. Prime Minister is dealing with this personally, so there's no need to worry. As for Third Prince, what about Third Prince? To be honest, although Third Prince has a lot of people helping him, but in the end, they are not important people. And he has already brought the elite Shadow Guard to keep an eye on Third Prince. Those people are not worth mentioning, but the problem is Sword Saint is there. Of course, otherwise, why would Ingi take action personally? But can Ingi stop the guy Mingwe? I have allocated 20 Elephant-class Golden warships, 2 Dragon-class warships, and all the Jinshi army soldiers in the capital to help Ingi. When the time comes, I will personally take care of the situation. Please recommend me. Subscribe. Thank you. Chapter 192. Grand Marshal Qin had said that he would personally hold the line and guard Third Young Master's path. His attitude was obvious. Grand Marshal Qin believed that Third Young Master's path was the most threatening. The others were not worth mentioning. Just as the Prime Minister had said, those princes were still 20 years too early to make waves in the capital. Obviously, it was not only Qianlan who thought so. Even the Emperor thought so. After Qianlan finished talking about how to deal with the Third Prince, the Emperor raised his hand to interrupt her. Let's stop here. The Emperor said, This guy Mingwe, I heard that she has taught you before? Hearing this, Qianlan suddenly raised her eyebrows, paused slightly, and then said truthfully, There is such a thing. I also heard that you admire him. There is no warrior in the Empire who does not admire Sword Saint. Qianlan knelt on one knee and said in a low voice, But I understand my position. As the Marshal of the Empire, It is my duty to protect the Empire. I will not show mercy. Get up. You are the Marshal of the Empire. How can I not trust you? I just want to remind you that you can personally watch the battle, but there is no need to charge and break through the enemy lines. No matter how many soldiers you have behind you, it is still Sword Saint. Be careful. Yes, I will not disappoint you. Go and do your work. The safety of the people in the capital will be entrusted to you. It is my duty. After ending the memorial with the Emperor, Marshal Qin walked away valiantly, her steps powerful. She used her slender body to walk out with the aura of a tiger. The Emperor finally raised his head and looked at Marshal Qin's back. His eyes were full of admiration. A moment later, the Emperor gently knocked on the yellow rosewood desk with beautiful patterns and quietly said, Your Majesty. There was no one else in the room, but a voice sounded out of nowhere. A black shadow seemed to distort space and appeared beside the Emperor. It was Yi. What do you think of Marshal Qin's response? The Emperor asked. With Marshal Qin's forces and me, it shouldn't be a problem to stop Lord Sword Saint, Shadow once said. That's good. The Emperor was silent for a while. Then, without warning, he said, When the time comes, keep an eye on Qin Lan, Your Majesty. He looked at the Emperor in shock. You don't trust Marshal Qin? She has been very close to the third prince since she was young, and she even has a master-disciple relationship with the guy Mingwei. Most importantly, as the Emperor, I can't completely trust anyone. The Emperor gently rubbed the emerald ring on his finger. Yes, all sorts of people began to enter and leave the small courtyard located in the corner of the capital. Everyone's expression was so serious, and their footsteps were hurried. A sentence was clearly written on everyone's face. I am a man who will do great things. No one can stop me. Don't block my way. They successfully created an atmosphere of a storm is coming in this small courtyard. As for what these people were here for, it was obvious without even thinking. Jilin and Bane couldn't help with these things, and they didn't want to either. However, humans were creatures that were easily affected by the atmosphere. When the entire atmosphere was busy and only one person was idle, that person would instinctively feel uncomfortable. Jilin didn't have this problem, but Bane did. Therefore, in order to avoid this busy atmosphere, Bane pulled Jilin up to the roof. The sky was getting dark, and the sun's rays were much gentler. The faint golden sunlight shone on the world, making the world feel much gentler and warmer. Bane stood on the roof, covered with green tiles. Although only the tips of his feet touched the smooth tiles, he stood very steadily. He was lost in thought as he looked at the majestic palace. The streets of the capital were full of vendor stalls, and everywhere was filled with the sound of selling goods. Pedestrians came and went, and children were in groups, jumping on the streets, laughing loudly. This magnificent city was full of vitality, tranquility, and peace. I really didn't expect that I would be involved in the fight for the throne between the princes of the Middle Empire. Bane was lost in thought as he looked for a while and said aloud, You're asking for trouble. Jilin said, This matter doesn't benefit you or me at all, but you're still so insistent. I thought the house would collapse when you stood up. Bane looked at Jilin's feet and found that only 1 or 2 tiles were broken. You underestimate Aisha too much. Jilin said, What's going on with Staya? Bane said, She wants to take advantage of the fact that I only have 1 clone to fight with me, to get rid of a hidden danger for humans, and to return peace to the world. Jilin said, It's really like her personality. I think so too. How did she fight with her life? Do you know about God's descent? I heard about it from Sword Saint, so that's how it is. Do you know about sacrifice? There shouldn't be anyone in the Saimai Empire that doesn't know the 10 major skills of a knight. She used them all. Staya is mighty, so righteous. Bane was silent for a moment before he praised loudly. There's something wrong with this princess. Jilin also shook his head in self-mockery, wondering what he caught. He spent so much effort to catch a princess, but she always wanted to kill him. He really couldn't take advantage of any opportunity. After using these 2 skills, Staya is still alive. You two have done your best. Baines said. More than that. We're practically at her beck and call, Ji-Lin said exaggeratedly. Hee hee. She's a princess. It's the treatment she deserves, Baines said. Suddenly, a comfortable night breeze blew by, causing Ji-Lin and Baines' clothes to flutter. The sun turned from a golden setting sun to a red setting sun. The sky was filled with burning clouds, quietly appearing. It was the most beautiful color in the world. Even Ji-Lin was impressed. But it didn't attract the attention of the bustling crowd below. Ji-Lin, look at them. Soon the capital will be in chaos. For them, this could be a disaster. But they still don't know anything. Baines suddenly said, That's normal. Most humans live out their lives in mediocrity. There's nothing special. Ji-Lin understood what Baines meant. You've really eaten people before? Baines suddenly asked. Of course. Ji-Lin said. Why? You won't be full by yourself. When you see wild fruits on the side of the road, you'll be curious about what they taste like and pick one to eat. People won't. They're afraid of poison. That's true. How many people have you eaten? 2. So few? When I ate the first one, I found it disgusting, so I decided not to eat it anymore. Then the second one? The second one is a person called a chef among you humans. It was before I met Aisha in a dense forest. I met him by chance. After that, we had an exchange. At that time, you could change into a human's appearance. Witches have witches' magic, and dragons naturally have dragons' means. Although I can't change my appearance, I can change the human's perception of me. I can make him think that I'm a human. Oh, at that time, he killed a rabbit. Although he looked hungry, he didn't eat it immediately. Instead, he tried to find a way to light a fire. Seeing that it was really troublesome for him, I decided to lend him a hand. Then, he took out more than 10 bottles and jars from God knows where and rubbed them all over the rabbit's body. After roasting it, he gave me half of it. It was the best thing I've ever eaten. Baines thought to himself, You said it was the best thing. I'm afraid that the chef's culinary skills have reached the peak. From then on, I felt that the so-called culinary skills were the means humans used to cook the corpses of other creatures. Baines opened his mouth and wanted to refute, but he felt that Ji-Lin's words made some sense. I asked him, how did he make the rabbits so delicious? He said he put his heart into it. I asked him why he put his heart into it. He said that the animals sacrificed themselves so that humans could survive. He tried his best to make them taste better, so that those animals didn't die too unjustly. I thought it was ridiculous, so I asked him, do you think the animals sacrifice themselves willingly? Do they want to? He didn't answer for a while. Baines didn't say anything. He thought to himself, if it were me, I wouldn't be able to answer either. Then, I let him see my appearance and asked him, are you willing to sacrifice yourself for my survival? He still didn't answer. Baines thought to himself. A megalosaurus suddenly appeared in front of him. No one would be able to say anything if it were anyone else. Then, I ate him. I think, if it were him, even if I ate him, he wouldn't be unhappy. Ji-Lin said. I don't think so. Baines finally spoke. For humans, the same thing happening to another person and to themselves are two completely different things. That's not good, Ji-Lin said. When Ji-Lin finished his story, the sky was completely dark. The entire capital was lit up. Just as the third prince said, the lights were as bright as day. Whoosh! Suddenly, there was a sharp sound of something breaking through the air. Baines thought it was the sound of an arrow breaking through the air and stood up abruptly. He stepped on 2 blue tiles and broke them. Pa! Then there was the sound of gunpowder exploding. Baines immediately breathed a sigh of relief. It was fireworks. Ji-Lin looked at the gorgeous flowers that suddenly bloomed in the sky, and his eyes shone brightly. Baines patted his arm, indicating that he didn't need to be nervous, and asked, You haven't seen it before? No, Ji-Lin said. It's fireworks. It's so beautiful. Everyone says so. This is also the signal we agreed on. The third prince, it has begun. No, it's already over, Ji-Lin said. Thank you everyone for your recommendation votes. Bookmarked. Also, I welcome everyone's comments. Chapter 193. Although not all short-lived things were beautiful, most of the beautiful things were short-lived. For example, fireworks. Dazzling fireworks suddenly bloomed, in the ink-black night sky. It was as if a few colorful and extremely beautiful flowers had suddenly bloomed on the black satin. This was the most dazzling spectacle that humans could create. Humans used their wisdom to decorate the sky that was supposed to be unreachable. It was enough to attract everyone's attention in an instant. The endless fireworks lit up half the sky. The people were like a river, rushing in one direction. Finally, they all gathered together like rivers flowing into the sea. That was the largest square in the capital. More than half of the people in the capital were gathered together to watch the long-awaited fireworks at the same time on the top floor of Jade Algae Pavilion. Lewin was holding a jug of wine and leaning against the wooden fence. He lazily looked at the fireworks in the sky. "Your Highness." Lewin's bodyguard called out. "HM, Your Highness is really willing to make a wedding dress for others." "Nonsense. My family doesn't run a tailor shop. How could I be willing? But the problem is, this thing can't be taken down." Lewin played with the hair in front of his forehead. A conspicuous red hair was hidden in a strand of black hair. That was a strand of hair that Ji-Lin condensed with the fire element. Once it exploded, it would be able to take Lewin away from this beautiful world without any warning with a soft bang sound. Sigh. The bodyguard sighed. Since Third Prince wants to rebel, why didn't he do it secretly? Instead, he made such a big fuss for everyone to see. There is no precedent for this kind of thing, and there is no reason for this. This is to gather the civilians together to avoid accidental injuries. Lewin picked up a grape from the fruit platter beside him, put it in his mouth, and said vaguely, "Third Imperial Brother, you want to set up a battle array and openly fight with Imperial Father. For a prince who wants to usurp the throne, this is a magnificent feat that has never been done before." Bang! Suddenly, an incomparably huge orange firework bloomed in the dark night. This firework was 4 to 5 times bigger than ordinary fireworks. It attracted the admiration of the crowd. Lewin's hand instantly stiffened. "Your Highness, it's time." The guard cupped his fist and said, "Yes, let's begin. The stage has been set up, and it's time to invite the main character on stage." "Yes." The guard cupped his fists and turned to go downstairs. Lewin took a sip of wine and smacked his lips. He glanced at the fireworks in the sky and sighed. Such grand fireworks have never been seen before. It's just too expensive. When the Third Prince succeeds, Your Highness can ask him for the money. A voice suddenly sounded. Then, Wang Li walked in leisurely. "Brother Wang." Lewin looked at him casually and said, "Since ancient times, have you ever seen an emperor with money in his pocket? That Third Prince has been alone for so many years, so he must have some savings. Anyway, he has no use for money when the time comes, so I can give it to His Highness to spend on cigarettes." Wang Li said. "Huh." Lewin chuckled. His laughter was full of sarcasm. If a person who has stayed in a brothel for more than 10 years still has half a cent left, I'll consider him amazing. A few years ago, it might have been my third brother who went to prostitutes. Later on, it was probably the sister in Chunfeng, Lu, who raised my third brother. Huh? Your Highness is right. Wang Li cupped his fist and said, "Brother Wang, what's your ranking in the Shadow Guard?" The Third Prince took a sip of wine and suddenly asked. His tone was relaxed and casual. It was the same tone as if he was asking someone what they had for lunch. On the surface, it was warm and gentle, but in fact, it hit a vital point. It was like a sudden clap of thunder in a warm day. Because it was too sudden, even Wang Li couldn't help but be stunned. Then, he laughed at himself and cupped his fist again. "Your Highness, I'm Beta Sagittarii 10. Almost in the top 10, I'm ashamed." Beta Sagittarii 10 said, "How did Your Highness find out?" "That's not important." "Indeed. Now that I've found out your identity, what are you going to do?" "I'll just stay here and do nothing. Keep an eye on me. Protect Your Highness. As expected of Imperial Father's man, you're so dignified. Your Highness is too kind." So, the Shadow Guard already knew about today's operation. There's no Shadow Guard that doesn't know about what happens in the capital. The Shadow Guard is everywhere, like a shadow that follows you everywhere. Then do you know who the person who carried the head that day was? I've never heard of this person before. I'm guessing that he's an otherworldly expert invited by a Sir Sword Saint? The third prince grinned and didn't say anything else. He had already finished his business. Next, he just needed to watch the show. He wouldn't say or do anything else in a dark alley next to the Ministry of Revenue's Yamen. Countless men in black were lying in wait. They were all dressed in black and had dark faces, but they were all holding shiny knives. As the biggest firework bloomed, the leader of the men in black raised his hand. The atmosphere suddenly became tense, like a soft rope that was suddenly pulled taut. Go! A hurried and clear word came out of the leader's mouth. A group of men in black leaped out from the group, their figures perfectly blending into the darkness. They silently snuck behind the Yamen runners guarding the door. After a few flashes of white light, the Yamen runners had already arrived. The men in black looked around vigilantly, then glanced at each other. Things went so smoothly that it was beyond their expectations. One of the men in black tiptoed to the Yamen gate and tried to push it. Creak! A sound that made one's teeth ache was heard. The thick black wooden door opened just like that. The man in black's eyes were filled with horror. His many years of experience on the battlefield had taught him that there must be something wrong if there was something abnormal. And if there was an abnormality at this time, it usually meant that there was an ambush sure enough before he could say the word, "Not good." The door was suddenly opened. Countless sharp arrows were shot out from the door. The man in black's eyes almost popped out of their sockets as he shouted. His whole body emitted a burst of golden light. When the incomparably sharp arrows hit his body, the sound of metal colliding could be heard. Then, the arrows fell to the ground. Ambush! The man in black finally seized the opportunity to shout this sentence. However, most of his brothers who came out with him were already lying in pools of blood. A general holding a spear and clad in battle armor rushed out of the door with countless soldiers surrounding the black-clothed man. I'm the general of the Jinshi army, Guiyu. I'm here on the order of the Western Marshal to capture the traitors. Protect the national treasury. You traitors, why don't you surrender now? If you continue to be stubborn, I'll make sure you die without a burial place. Hearing this, the leader of the men in black walked out from the alley and said sarcastically, Old Gua, you still like to show off before the war. You've said this kind of useless nonsense hundreds of times, even if you haven't said it 1,000 times. Have you ever seen anyone surrender without putting up a fight? Guiyu frowned and thought for a while. He really couldn't remember who this person was, so he said, I've seen a few. Who are you? Ha ha ha. The man in black laughed a few times. You must have asked this question more than 1,000 times. Nonsense again. If I were to tell you, why would I cover my face? Why would I use this voice-changing skill? What business do you have here? Why would you come to the National Treasury? To rob money. What a joke. There's no money in the National Treasury. Why do you care? It seems that I have to take you down to make you obedient. Bring it on. Kill. Jilin was fighting on the roof. He could clearly feel that the atmosphere in the city had become chaotic. There were many battles happening at the same time, and the scale was not small. It was an indescribable feeling. Jilin, it's time to go. Bane had already jumped down from the roof and looked up at Jilin. Oh, Jilin replied. In his heart, he wondered why this human was like a monkey. Jilin directly jumped down from the roof, leaving 2 big holes in the ground. Compared to Bane's graceful and agile movements, it lacked a sense of beauty. Let's go. The third prince is waiting for us. Bane called out, looking quite impatient. Well, no matter which teenager could participate in such a big event, it was inevitable that they would be excited. This is what humans call the spirit of a teenager. Jilin thought, Are you ready? Do you know what it means to open this door? Sword Saint looked at the third prince and asked. He finally held a sword in his hand. No, I don't know. The third prince's answer was very honest. Brother Long, Brother Bei, you're here. Even Ouyang Ju couldn't help but sigh. What kind of situation is this? Why is the third prince still in the mood to pester us endlessly? No one believed that the third prince really didn't know, but it might be true that he wasn't ready. It's fine. Even if you weren't ready, it's not up to you now. Sword Saint patted the third prince's shoulder, pointed at the courtyard door, and said, Go open that door. People have to force themselves. Put yourself on a path of no return, then naturally you can only keep moving forward. Although I think your words are very reasonable, I don't agree. The third prince said with a sad face. Go quickly. The third prince knew that there was no turning back, so he slowly walked to the courtyard door and, under everyone's gaze, opened the door. The third prince felt that the door that was usually very light, as if it could be kicked open, suddenly became very, very heavy. But in the end, it still opened. Please recommend, please add, thank you. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.